These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code TOM. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
For our Thom Hartmann Book Club excerpt today, we're reading from Ed Morales' new book, Fantasy Island, Colonialism, Exploitation, and the Betrayal of Puerto Rico. This is from the first chapter. There was never any doubt that the United States wanted Puerto Rico for its own when it began a war with Spain near the turn of the 20th century. Cuba had been in the throes of independence war with Spain off and on since 1868, and the conflict that began in 1895 seemed ripe for the United States to capitalize on. The sinking of the USS Maine, an American naval ship destroyed by an explosion while moored just outside Havana, fueled American entry into the war. Although there are conflicting theories about the source of the explosion, including the likelihood it was caused by a spontaneous internal fire, William Randolph Hearst's newspaper chain blew up the incident into the perfect catalyst for the United States to enter the conflict. When Theodore Roosevelt entered the fray with his army of Rough Riders, the whole affair came as no surprise to anyone who'd been paying attention to the lust U.S. government leaders and military had long expressed to expand southward and westward. And although the idea of manifest destiny was at the forefront of the political discourse of this period, it's less often observed that the United States' expansionist gaze was saturated with racial language and attitudes, at once desirous of and repelled by Latin America's mestizo mulatto social dynamic. The Haitian Revolution at the end of the 19th century and into the 20th created a U.S. obsession with both Cuba and Puerto Rico because of the potential of a similar black-led revolt on those islands. In 1826, Virginia Senator John Randolph feared that such a revolt would render the southern United States vulnerable to invasion from Cubans in rowboats. For this reason, he objected to the United States participating in the 1826 Panama Congress because American diplomats would have to endure the horror of a U.S. diplomat taking his seat in the Congress, quote, beside the native African, their American descendants, the mixed breeds, the Indians, and the half-breeds, without any offense or scandal at so motley a mixture, end quote. The logic driving this perspective underlined not only the importance of slavery to the emergence of capitalism in the 19th century, but also, as Matthew Karp points out in this vast southern empire, the extent to which slave owners and their elected representatives disproportionately shaped U.S. foreign policy. Going back as far as the Haitian Revolution, fear of a successful slave rebellion in the newly formed United States strongly motivated Southern politicians. As Karp mentions, to that end, Presidents Madison and Monroe, quote, used overwhelming force to destroy black maroon settlements in southern Florida, end quote. Fear of slave rebellions also briefly united the interests of American slaveholders and Cuban elites who wanted independence from Spain, but in the late 19th century, after abolition, Roosevelt's forces fought in conjunction with Afro-Cuban armies against their common Spanish foe. The move to wrest Cuba and Puerto Rico from Spain came just as Spain had finally relented to end slavery as a concession to black rebel Cuban armies that had formed to push for independence. In a further move to placate continued unrest on the island, in November 1897, Spain signed automatic charters for Cuba and Puerto Rico, which gave limited home rule governments to both islands. Puerto Rico would gain full representation in the Cortes, the Spanish parliament, and could veto Spanish commercial treaties unfavorable to them while also retaining the rights to set tariffs on imports and exports. In this way, Puerto Ricans were granted a kind of citizenship that allowed self-government, grafted on what was left of their Spanish subjecthood. Yet on July 25, 1898, 8 days after the first meeting of the newly formed Puerto Rican Parliament, U.S. troops arrived in the southern port of Guanica and replaced the Spanish flag with the stars and stripes. This date would be remembered over 50 years later when the United States finally followed through on a project to allow Puerto Ricans to have limited autonomy and self-government. But at the time, it was both the end of Teddy Roosevelt's splendid little war and the beginning of the current quandary over what exactly Puerto Rico's new colonial master would do with the island. Although historians agree that there was no pre-existing plan for designating Puerto Rico's status, there was a general belief that Puerto Rico could be incorporated as a U.S. territory, and probably would be. This led many to assume that it would follow a similar path to statehood as former territories like Florida and Louisiana. At the very least, it would, by acceding to military control, receive, quote, the advantages and blessings of enlightened civilization, end quote, as Puerto Rico's first military governor, Nelson A. Miles, declared 3 days after the landing of Guanica. Because Cuba was so militarized during its wars for independence, the United States decided to allow it national sovereignty, thinking it could still exert considerable control over the economy because of existing business interests and a ready-made set of Cuban consumers who were already buying Ford Model Ts. But although Puerto Rico had experienced anti-Spanish uprisings in the mid-19th century, in 1898 they did not have nearly the same level of armed mobilization present. So the United States held on to it, particularly because of its geographic location, which would provide the United States with a stronghold on the easternmost tip of the Caribbean. The book is Fantasy Island by Ed Morales.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, Shirna Freitag. Happy Friday, TGIF, Shabbat Shalom, Juma Mubarak. Welcome. It's Anything Goes Friday, although the second hour of our program, the first hour, the third hour is going to be just you and me, but the second hour of our program, Congressman Ro Khanna, who represents the 17th District of California, he is vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, will be with us for the entire hour taking your calls. So if there are things that you would like to ask Congressman Khanna, just hang on to the second hour, because he'll be here for that whole hour at 202-225-3121. It is, however, Anything Goes Friday. So I'll be taking your calls on whatever you'd like to talk about, from politics to flying saucers. I want to get into Trump Derangement Syndrome in just a moment. That's the rant that I wrote this morning over at Hartmann Report. In the third hour of our program, there are a couple of, I think, fairly important news stories that I want to get into as well. Number one, the Special Inspector General report for the reconstruction of Afghanistan, the SIGAR report just came in. And what is going on with Afghanistan's children is shocking. And you need to know about it. We'll talk about that in our third hour. Uncovering the Russian Stooges in America. This investigation into Rudy Giuliani looks like it's going a whole lot deeper than we thought. And not just, I say Russian stooges. What I really should be saying is, former Soviet Republic oligarch stooges, because it looks like Rudy Giuliani was actually working for a billionaire in Ukraine. So we'll get into that in the third hour. And also this whole debate about whether Joe Biden Biden should require the entire military to get vaccinated. I want to get into that as well. And we can talk about that too. Actually, we can get into that in our second hour here as I'm scrolling through my one sheet. But I want to start with this Trump Derangement Syndrome. Yesterday, Rudy Giuliani, they executed search warrants on Rudy Giuliani's home and his Park Avenue office. And they took his laptop and his iPhone and his iPad and all this kind of stuff. And his lawyer came out and they said, why are they doing this? And he says, they're suffering from Trump Derangement Syndrome. And I'm sitting here going, yeah, me too. There's a lot of us who are suffering from Trump Derangement Syndrome. And by the way, it's normal. Now, of course, I'm using that phrase, which has no actual medical or legal meaning, to be both, I was going to say hyperbolic, but I'm really not exaggerating. But, for effect, shall we say. And also, ironically, but follow my logic here. I would say that Trump Derangement Syndrome is actually a sign of good and normal mental health. It means that your psychological alert system is working. It means that your psychological and emotional defense systems are working. For example, in the neighborhood where I live in the northern part of Portland, we have an arsonist in our neighborhood. He has set on fire the outdoor furniture that people have next to their houses, a couple of them, and nearly lit up a house. Best guess is he's not actually trying to burn down somebody's houses. He's just liking to set fires. But hey, there's an arsonist in our neighborhood, and then there's a thief in the neighborhood. He has broken into several houses, including one where the people were home, and stolen, laptops and computers and things. And Sunday, I was sitting here working, and I can see out my window down the street that I live on, and suddenly this truck comes peeling out of one of my neighbor's driveways and just screaming down. Screaming rubber. Leaving rubber on the road, screaming down this 15-mile-an-hour residential road at must have been 60 miles an hour. Turns out it was this burglar guy, and he's apparently graduated from stealing computers to stealing cars. So at the moment, and by the way, this isn't just unique to Portland. This is happening all over America right now. We've got 40 years of Reaganomics, which have gutted the middle class. You've got a serious mental health crisis going on, and it is particularly critical in many of the homeless communities. Some of them seem to be running more like, little communities. Others seem to have been taken over by, basically the mentally ill. And this guy appears to be associated with one of the nearby homeless communities. We should be doing something about this. And I'm not talking about, bringing in the police and the army. I'm talking about, providing services to people. But, Ronald Reagan broke that entire system, and nobody has fixed it. And so, like I said, this isn't just Portland. This is happening. These kinds of, quote, small crimes are happening in towns all over the country. And so, my neighbors and I, we're all feeling a little deranged. We've got arsonist and burglar derangement syndrome, and we're talking to each other in email and, catching up with the police, and people are upgrading their security systems and stuff like that. So, in that same vein, it shouldn't surprise anybody that millions of Americans don't feel safe and do continue to feel deranged and won't feel safe until Donald Trump and his authoritarian, democracy-hating, white supremacist, gun fetishist followers no longer play any kind of meaningful role on the American political scene, and his criminal buddies, including the rest of his crime family, have been held to account. I mean, just consider what I mentioned the arsonist here. Just consider what Trump has done. I mean, he knew back in January how deadly this virus was. He told Bob Woodward all about it. I'm talking about a year ago, January. And he did nothing. He refused to use the Defense Production Act even to get masks and gowns to people working in hospitals, for God's sake. The only thing he used it for was to force black and brown people back into meatpacking plants where they were dropping like flies from COVID. Oh, as a result of Trump's incompetence and malice, 500,000 Americans are dead. That means that there's several million American families who are suffering, who are feeling a little deranged right now. People who've lost parents and siblings and grandparents and children and neighbors and loved ones. When he could have stopped this disease, just like Australia stopped it, Taiwan stopped it, South Korea stopped it, he could have done it. He nearly started a nuclear war with North Korea, and then went over there to kiss Kim Jong-un's ass a couple of times. He sucked up to the butcher of Saudi Arabia and bragged that he had saved MBS's ass. Using that word twice there, I guess over the top here, but you get it. He insisted that America's own intelligence agencies were lying, and that Russia and other countries that were helping him get elected and were friendly to him were actually telling the truth. They could do no wrong. He and his family have been expropriating money, taking money from pretty much anything that moves, from the inaugural committee right straight on through. We're now discovering massive overpayments to Trump properties around the world. He treated the emolument clause, which is a core part of our Constitution, like a joke. He conned his followers out of hundreds of millions of dollars and is continuing to con them with his election fraud big lie. He surrounded himself with actual criminals, actual traitors, ne'er-do-wells, and outright grifters. His guide to joy is still bent on destroying the post office, which Trump thought was going to help him win the election. Now it's, hey, let's privatize it and make some big bucks for our GOP donors. He tried to destroy Obamacare. He threw 2 million people off health care. He tried to destroy Medicaid and Medicare. He tore children from their parents.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And several of them died. He's cranked up anti-white hate to the point that Asian Americans, elderly Asians, are getting... Is it any surprise we're suffering Trump Derangement Syndrome? But as I said, it's Anything Goes Friday. We can talk about whatever you would like to talk about. Chaz in Lakewood, Washington. Hey, Chaz, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I wondered if I could have a minute or two to wax philosophical about the last few years we've had to endure.
You can, although unless you're driving and using Bluetooth, if you could get your mouth closer to the microphone, it'll be easier to understand what you're saying.
Fortunately, I'm pulled over. All right, here I go. First time I ever heard about COVID-19. First time I ever heard about COVID-19 was on your program, and even then you seemed to consider the potential impact ominously. I had a feeling at the beginning of Trump's administration that deaths were possible and that democracy itself could be in peril. I didn't say it out loud because the whole notion just seemed so preposterous at the time. And we were assured that this virus will one day magically disappear, give or take 500,000 dead Americans. But we were instead subject every day to be in a crisis today until you're good. The crisis became so close to losing it all in the election in 2020. And now I find myself
rumbling. Yeah. Chaz, I'm having a real hard time understanding you. Can you cut right to the chase, please? Under normal circumstances, no problem. But I'm only getting every other word here.
Let me give you a call next week when I'm homebound.
Okay, sounds like a plan. I appreciate that, Chaz. Thank you. Thank you very much. Mike in Lomita, California. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. I'm calling in support of the dental health of the gent who called on Tuesday, who gnashes his teeth whenever the word news is linked with the bushy-tailed member of the dog family renowned for stealing chickens. To borrow a phrase from Professor Lakoff, don't think of a fox.
Right.
Now, the good professor, if I understand him, asserts that when we speak the negation of a lie, we're actually giving it life in the unconsciousness of the listener. And Fox Agenda was invented by Mr. Ailes. What a glorious name for such a depressing villain. To defeat the sacred cause it claims to support. Accuracy, 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 plus brevity and clarity, a.k.a. the news. Now, when you're the soul of deception, you choose a name that belies your intent and practice. And whenever we quote that fraud, we're accessories to it. So linking Fox with the practice of journalism is a far worse obscenity than any words banned by the FCC. It's an assault on the right of an electorate to be informed rather than deceived. When a TV channel asserts its right to mislead the public on facts about public health and the health of children and attacks on the 911 system, it should be stripped of the name news by every decent human being. Now, going from the teeth to the opposite end of the digestive channel, the person who launched the Fox war on Halloween by attacking children's masks, his clear aim is to raise his stock by becoming the greatest downstream alimentary orifice since Putin's viceroy from Queens. And we owe him not to mention his name ever, except, if need be, to call him Lace.
Okay, there you go. And the previous guy, there we go. Mike, thank you. Thank you. You know, it's why if I am going to refer to that television network, generally I call it Fox So-Called News. And I think the so-called sticks in our unconscious mind just as much as anything else does. I get Lakoff, but I get your point too. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So a while ago at Davos, Michael Dell, the computer billionaire who started out selling computers out of his dorm room in college. I was running CompuServe forums back in the day. This is in the late 70s or the early 80s, and he was selling them on CompuServe in my forums. And, you know, now he's worth billions. And somebody asked him, you know, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is proposing a 70% tax bracket for people who make the kind of money you make. What do you think of that? And his response was, a 70% tax rate? Name a country where that ever worked. Ever. And it turns out there is such a country, and apparently Michael Dell didn't know this. I think a lot of Americans don't know this, that there was a country that had its greatest period of prosperity in its entire history with a top tax rate that was above 70%. In fact, it hit 90% for more than half the time. And that was the United States of America. It's a new video over at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. The other thing, you know, there's the other thing I wanted to mention very quickly, and actually I'm going to rant about this just a little bit, and then we'll go to Anything Goes Friday. Three stories here that seemingly are all separate stories, but I think they're all the same story in a very real way. The first is a diary from Portland True Blue over at Daily Kos. Presumably somebody from Portland, who says, I came back 2 days early because my ECMO patient, this is somebody who's, you know, basically living on something very close to a respirator, was not going to make it. All the medical options have been exhausted. His lungs will not heal enough to support life, and a transport is not an option. He realized he's not getting better. He's dying. This is somebody who has COVID. He met with a palliative care team and a priest. He requested that his life support be withdrawn. His family has been here the last 3 days. His only request was that he wanted to say goodbye to his nurses. Thus, this person went, you know, took off, came back 2 days early to work. We spoke privately about his life and death, his journey's end. His biggest worry was for his family, but he was not afraid. He thanked me as he held my hand. There were tears in my eyes, but not his. Never have I witnessed such courage and such faith. I was not able to be there for the withdrawal of life support, just not emotionally able. A member of the palliative team withdrew his life support. I feel such a sense of personal failure because at the end, my courage and strength failed, leaving me unable to do my duty of final care. My grief and regret are fierce. He died peacefully and quickly this afternoon, surrounded by his family, and received the last rites. So, number one, this is happening all over the country right now. It's not happening as frequently. When Donald Trump left office, it was 3,000 or 4,000 people a day who were dying from COVID. Now we're down to a few hundred a day. Thank God. But we're still at a few hundred a day, number one. Number two, Joe Biden hasn't decided on requiring U.S. military members to get COVID vaccines. I think he needs to be doing this right away. What say you? I think that he should be requiring all members of the military, and frankly, to the extent that he has the power to do it, all federal employees. If you want to be in the workplace, if you want to come back to work, if you want to interact with other human beings, you have to prove you've gotten vaccinated. And one of the reasons that I'm saying this, now this is a study that was done, it was just published in the medical journal Stroke. It was 132 centers in 36 countries. Most of this study was done before there were any vaccines. So keep that in mind. But this was all people who had COVID, but didn't know it because they had no symptoms, which is the kind of COVID that people, or apparently, again, I'm not a doctor, this is not medical advice, and don't flip out about this. The odds, once you're fully vaccinated, the odds of getting COVID and dying from it are less than the odds of dying in a car accident. Right? Your odds are really, really good if you're vaccinated. But still, some people get COVID, few symptoms, not enough to kill you or get you in the hospital, but very few symptoms, even after they're vaccinated. And another reason to be very careful, particularly with these new variants around. But they looked at these people who had, this is a quote from the study. This is Hebrew University professor Rowan Lecker, one of the 36 countries that participated in this 132 center study. Quote, surprisingly, many patients that we identified as having both coronavirus and a stroke did not present the typical clinical symptoms of coronavirus. Some 40% of them had no fever, no shortness of breath, no abdominal pain, no diarrhea, and so on. But because they were admitted to the hospital, they were routinely tested, and we were able to identify them as virus carriers. Now, what happened to these people? They had strokes. Every single one of these patients that they're looking at were people who had strokes. And they went back and said, why did these seemingly healthy people, many of them in their 30s and 40s, why did these seemingly healthy people have strokes when they were showing no symptoms of COVID or anything else? And it turns out the only variable that they could identify, and again, they cannot prove causation here. This is correlation. But, I think it's just the next step, is that they had COVID, low symptom COVID, and it was producing these strokes. He said basically the individuals younger than 55 had no risk factor other than COVID. The brain is one of the organs that the coronavirus targets, as well as the blood vessels in the brain. We believe that this disease may lead to local thrombosis, in other words, a local blood clot that is producing a stroke. And he goes on, he says, if anything, the vaccine can reduce the risks, and this study was conducted before the vaccine was available. So bottom line, again, in my opinion, Joe Biden should be requiring every member of the military and any other federal employee he has the power to require to get vaccinated. Businesses need to start saying no shoes, no service, no vaccine card, right? No shoes, no shirt, no vaccine card, no service.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We need to get America vaccinated. And as long as the Republicans and their media continue promoting this anti-vaxxer stuff, we're in trouble.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Under the Influence, Putting Peer Pressure to Work by Robert H. Frank. And I'm reading from the prologue. That we are more closely connected to one another than most of us realize is an old idea. An important variation dates from 1929, when Hungarian writer Frigyes Karinthy published a short story entitled Chains. Two of the story's main characters speculate that any two living people can be connected by a chain involving no more than 5 acquaintances. That some such chains exist is hardly surprising, since most of us can think of people in distant locations to whom we're connected through a small number of intermediaries. The man bites dog aspect of Karinthy's conjecture is that almost any two people, A and E, could be linked by a chain like A knows B, B knows C, C knows D, who knows E. One of the first systematic attempts to test this claim came in the 1960s with a series of experiments by the psychologist Stanley Milgram. In it, he sent packages containing a small booklet to 96 people chosen at random from the Omaha, Nebraska telephone directory. His cover letter asked them to try to forward the booklet to a specific residence of Boston, Massachusetts, through a chain of personal acquaintances. He told them the name and address of the Boston resident, that he worked as a stockbroker, and that the first person in their chain should be somebody they knew on a first-name basis. Milgram also advised them to choose someone they believed, presumably based on the target's location and occupation, could be socially closer to the target than they were themselves. Subsequent recipients in the chain were asked to forward the same instructions. Many of the Omaha recipients undoubtedly tossed Milgram's booklet in the trash, so it's remarkable that the Boston target received 18 of the 96 packages. The average number of links in the 18 chains was 5.9. But the now familiar expression 6 degrees of separation would not gain broad currency until many years later, when John Guare's play by that name premiered on Broadway in 1990. The concept became a meme in full when 4 Albright College students introduced 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon in 1994, a game designed to measure the professional proximity of an actor, living or dead, to the American film star Kevin Bacon. An actor has a Bacon number of 1, for example, if he or she appeared in the same film with Bacon. Someone who appeared in a film with another actor who appeared in a film with Bacon has a Bacon number of 2, and so on. The average Bacon number is 2.95 among actors who have one. In that group, even the actor most distant from Bacon, William Rufus Shafter, has a Bacon number of only 7. Shafter, a Union Army officer during the Civil War, appeared in 2 films in 1898. For academics who study social connectedness, the 6 degrees concept gained little traction until 1998. That's when the sociologist Duncan Watts and the mathematician Steve Straga published their landmark paper, Collective Dynamics of Small World Networks in Nature. In the years since then, this paper has provided the mathematical foundation for the analytical tools that social scientists have been using with such remarkable success to study how ideas and behaviors spread through populations like infectious diseases. It has already been cited by other scholars more than 38,000 times and is one of the few papers ever published to be among the most widely cited works in multiple disciplines. In his 1976 book, The Selfish Gene, the evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins coined the term meme, which Webster now defines as an idea, behavior, style, or usage that spreads from person to person within a culture. The meme is to cultural transmission, Dawkins argued, as the gene is to biological transmission. One of Charles Darwin's central insights was that natural selection favors genetic variations that enhance the individual organism's ability to survive and reproduce. Much of the time, the same variations also benefit larger groups, but often not. For example, an inclination to cheat when no one's looking might benefit individuals, but widespread cheating almost always makes matters worse for groups. It is the same with memes. The memes that propagate most successfully are often ones that benefit both individuals and groups. But here too, not always. As the legal scholar Jeffrey Stake has argued, ideas should not be treated as inert products, but as living things that sometimes exert some influence over their environment. Some of the ideas are more adept at surviving than others, and the ones that survive will not necessarily be good for humans. It is often hard to evaluate whether a specific behavior even qualifies as a meme, and if so, whether its consequences on balance are positive or negative. Yet sometimes the evidence is clear. We know, for example, that the strongest predictor of whether people will take up smoking is the proportion of their close friends who smoke. Smoking is thus clearly a meme. The negative health consequences of smoking are also conclusively documented, and most smokers themselves express regret over having started. By definition, then, smoking unambiguously qualifies as a socially destructive meme. On the other side of the ledger, we have compelling evidence that the adoption of photovoltaic solar panels is both socially contagious and almost uniformly positive in terms of environmental consequences. Accordingly, few would object to calling the practice a socially beneficial meme. Adam Smith, widely considered the father of economics, is often cited in defense of the claim that competitive markets produce the greatest good for the greatest number. The book is Under the Influence by Robert H. Frank.
Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Amazing story over at the Washington Post today. A guy that referred to himself in a group chat as Shadow Moses. His actual name is Cody Richard Griggers. I'm not doxing him here. It's right there in the front, you know, in the Washington Post. And it turns out he's a Georgia sheriff's deputy. He, again, quoting from the FBI documents, quote, Griggers boasted about beating a black man during an arrest, threatened to falsely charge black people with felonies so that they could not vote, and advocated killing politicians and others he viewed as political enemies. He referred to beating up black people as, quote, a sweet stress relief. Welcome to America. And you think we don't all have Trump Derangement Syndrome? I mean, we've got some serious work to do. Anyhow, it's Anything Goes Friday. Let's pick up your phone calls here. Mark in Valley, Washington. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Well, I got a disturbing little tidbit of news. Being on Eastern Washington, we can watch Coeur d'Alene local news, and my son's girlfriend was watching the other night, and this is the only part she wasn't sure on whether the law got passed or they're trying to pass it, but they're trying to make it a bounty on wolves to be trophy hunting or trapped, and the bounty will be paid by the Idaho taxpayers.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, that's some derangement syndrome there.
Yeah, there you go. And you know, we've just seen these stories about Wayne LaPierre and his wife going on an elephant hunting expedition, and it took him a whole bunch of shots to kill the elephant at almost point blank range because he's such an incompetent hunter. And then his wife is cutting off the tail and look at me, I've got a trophy. And it's the same thing with the wolves. I mean, you know, you've got these it's the small penis gun club, you know.
They're damaged
they're
people.
Out there.
They're severely damaged people with no morals.
They are, and they think that killing animals is somehow, you know, it enhances their masculinity or gives them a sense of safety or security or something, and it's just wrong. It's just so wrong. Mark, thank you for the call. Carlos in Carson, California. Carlos, it says here you disagree with me about what?
Gun control. Listen.
Okay.
Gun control makes people vulnerable to government control, government dictatorship. Let me cite you a few historical examples. Pol Pot in Cambodia confiscated guns before he went on to kill 2 million Cambodians. And I met a lot of Cambodians here in Long Beach, California, who tell me the horror stories.
Yeah, there were very few guns in Cambodia, Carlos, and Pol Pot didn't actually start with gun owners. He started with people who were educated. The first people that Pol Pot rounded up were people who wore glasses. If you know how to read, you were in trouble in Cambodia. Pol Pot tried to do what the French Revolution tried to do in the 1790s. He reset the calendar at the year zero. He declared himself the founder of the Cambodian race, and I put that in quotes. I mean, this has nothing to do with gun control whatsoever. And I don't know where you're pulling, what weird little corner of the internet you're pulling that from, but it's BS. Next example.
Idi Amin confiscated guns before he went on to kill 300,000.
He did not, Carlos. Carlos, in 1979 and 1980, I worked in Uganda during the Civil War. I was running or helping run a refugee camp in Mbale in Uganda. We had 10,000 people from the Karamoja tribe just north of there who were starving to death as a result of what happened there. There were no guns to begin with. The Karamojong were nomadic people who principally drank blood and milk from their cattle. They did not have guns. They did not have a military. And it wasn't Idi Amin, by the way, who took over the country and slaughtered people. It was the Tanzanians to the south who invaded the country to kick out Idi Amin. And it was when Idi Amin's men fled through the north, and I was there a month after this happened. And it was when Idi Amin's men fled through the north, they raped every woman they could find. They killed as many of the men as they could. The vast majority of the people that we had in the camp that we were running with the Red Cross, and the woman with the Red Cross who was actually running the camp, her name was Anne. She was an Irish Red Cross nurse. She was shot in the head a week after I left by a sniper. But those people were, that was Idi Amin's army. A civilian population, no matter how well armed it is, cannot stand up to an army. The Jews in Poland couldn't stand up to the Wehrmacht. The Karamojong in Uganda could not stand up to Amin's army. When they were fleeing, by the way, Amin's army couldn't stand up to the Tanzanians, who were better armed. The Cambodians couldn't stand up to Pol Pot's army. You will never find an example, to the best of my knowledge, where a quote armed populace. I mean, you had people try it in the United States. You look up Bacon's Rebellion sometime. It was poor whites and blacks who got together and said, "Okay, we're going to take on George Washington's army." You can't find an example of people using guns to stop a quote tyrannical government. It doesn't work. You want to stop a tyrannical government? Stop it from being tyrannical. You have to use political means. All you do when you distribute massive numbers of guns among the people is you have massive numbers of suicides, childhood deaths, accidental deaths, mass murders, and people committing multiple homicides with guns instead of singular homicides with knives. Carlos, you're living and breathing a fantasy world. Not only that, none of the founders ever, you will not find a single reference anywhere in the founding documents of this country to the Second Amendment being there so that we could fight a tyrannical government. Never, never, ever. The Second Amendment was there for two reasons. Number one, because there was a huge debate among the founders about whether we should even have an army during time of peace. They thought the state militias, like Switzerland did up until just the last 20 years, like they did for hundreds of years, the cantons should be, the states should be armed, and they wanted to protect the slave patrols in Georgia, South Carolina, and Virginia. Carlos, back to you.
Okay. Hitler confiscated guns also. They serve as deterrents. At least
Hitler actually passed out guns, Carlos. Hitler started the Hitler Youth Program. I'm forgetting the name of it. I lived in Germany for a year, Carlos. I knew a bunch of these Nazis. I read The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. I'm telling you, Hitler started a program called the Hitler Youth, and one of the major things of the Hitler Youth was teaching gunmanship, how to fire guns. Hitler was arming people. The only exception was you couldn't get armed if you had been identified, and this was all post 1934. You couldn't get armed if you had been identified as a communist or a Jew. But at that, I mean, you had people in the Warsaw Ghetto who tried to fight back against the Nazis with weapons, and the Wehrmacht came in with tanks, with machine guns, with belt machine guns that would fire 50, 100 rounds at a time, and just mowed them down. These examples, Carlos, these are pathetic. These are the kind of pathetic made-up stories that some 17-year-old in fact, it was a 17-year-old. Back in 1974, there was an article in The Rifleman, which was the NRA's magazine, that was the first time that anybody can document that anybody made a serious argument in any publication in the United States that the founders of the United States wanted the Second Amendment so that people could fight against a tyrannical government. It was a lie then. It got adopted by the NRA. It's being promoted by the weapons manufacturers and they're very well-paid toadies in the Republican Party. But it was a lie then, and it's a lie now.
Listen, I'd rather have my guns when the progressive communist revolutions break out and you got all these vandals trying to come into my home, trying to take it over. During the
that's a whole completely issue, Carlos. Like I said, I started this rant. There's a guy who has broken into 2 houses in, not in my immediate neighborhood, but within 3 blocks of where I live. And in one of those houses, there was somebody home. Yeah, I can see having a gun for self-defense. I'm not opposed to that. But, that's a whole different thing from these people who are piling up 15 AR-15s in their back room and 5,000 rounds of ammunition because they think somehow they're going to heroically stop the government from Joe Biden giving everybody health insurance.
All these gradual gun legislation will eventually lead to total gun confiscation. Look what happens in Chicago. In Chicago, the outlaws have the guns. And that's the murder rate capital of the world by guns, and guns are allowed there.
In Chicago, the outlaws have the guns because in Indiana, right across the border, 5 minutes across the border. In fact, the vast majority of the guns that are seized in Chicago were sold in Indiana. You go literally right across the border. And somebody called up the other day onto this program to say, no, that's not true. And I got literally dozens of emails, text messages, tweets from people saying, or not text messages, tweets from people saying, I live in Indiana. Here's the names of the gun stores. In fact, one guy sent me a Google map, 15 gun stores right along the Illinois border. You want to get guns out of the hands of criminals? Let's start licensing guns. Let's start insuring guns. Let's start registering guns. But let's stop selling guns to anybody who wants to just walk into a gun store in Indiana just because they're illegal in Chicago. Carlos, give me an argument that works.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
The closest I can come to that is, somebody who is well-trained, well-prepared, careful, thoughtful, perhaps having a gun self-defense in their home. That's it. And welcome back. Paul in Lucerne, Pennsylvania. Pigeons produce milk? What?
Yeah, 2 things real quick, Tom. I'm actually Paul from Lucerne, California. I just have a VPN.
Okay.
And Carlos, your argument's a strongman argument. Bad guys don't kill innocent people. I'm sorry. I don't care about bad guys having guns. I care about psychopaths having guns. They kill innocent people. Now, pigeons produce milk.
There you go.
Now, if you're going to be a robot, going to design a robot, you're going to make it biological, right? And you're observing planet Earth, you're going to mostly observe mammals, and they produce milk. Birds do not. The only birds on planet Earth that produce milk are pigeons. I used to raise pigeons, I know. I had 2
Are you trying to tell me that pigeons have breasts?
No.
Not to use the word salaciously, but medically, that pigeons have mammary glands that actually produce milk?
Yes, when you have baby pigeons, their beaks are completely different, so they can squeeze the mammary glands and squirt the milk into their mouth. And the reason why I know this is because I used to raise pigeons, and my pigeons got wiped out by my landlord and hawks, and I had three babies left. My mom went to UC Davis and learned how to make pigeon milk and taught me, and I raised them from little tiny pigeons. So they got older.
Well, that's amazing.
They're my best friends.
So,
I'd let them out.
What percentage of the pigeons that are running around?
Well,
so what percentage of the pigeons that we see flying around do you think are robots versus milk drinkers?
Well, they're all robots. They're biological robots. They're not physical robots. They're biological robots.
I see.
That's how you do it, Tom.
And the aliens who built these robotic pigeons
have a little reception
right,
chip.
and the robots who built these robotic
constantly to them. Yeah.
And the robots who built these robotic spy pigeons didn't realize that birds don't have mammary glands, and so they must have cloned one of the cows that they kidnapped and did whatever they do to cows. It's amazing. Paul, thank you for the call. That was a good one. Don in Windsboro, I love those calls on Friday. Don in Windsboro, South Carolina. Hey, Don, what's up?
Hey, Tom, good to talk to you. Thank you and your family for all you do. I wanted to ask if you've heard anything about Postmaster DeJoyce. He might be from the Portland area as far as his home and work and stuff, I think I heard. But Biden has appointed some more people on the board who put the postmaster in office, and from what I gathered, it was to try to get DeJoyce out of there. And DeJoyce said something to the effect of, he's not going anywhere. But have you heard anything?
Here's the story, Don, real quick. Yeah, here's the story. Yeah, there are 10 members of the Postal Board of Governors. It takes 6 members to replace the Postmaster General. 7 of those members are Trump holdovers. There were no members when Trump came into office because Mitch McConnell wouldn't confirm anybody. They had to be confirmed by the Senate. Biden has appointed 3 people to replace the 3 people who have resigned, who have left since Trump. But there's still 7 Trump loyalists. There are a number of members of Congress, including both my senators, Ron Wyden and Jeff Merkley, who are demanding that Biden fire those 7 holdovers. So far, Biden hasn't done it. I think he's going to wait and see what happens with the 3 that he's trying to get through the Senate. But DeJoy is continuing with his program. In fact, I'll be telling you about that in the 3rd hour of the program. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So back in the day, and I mean back in the 1780s, literally when the Constitutional Convention was happening in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787, there was this debate about the quality of the vote. Whether people who only landowners should be allowed to vote, stuff like that. And, in order to ensure that well-informed people who really care about voting are the only ones voting. It didn't pass. It was rejected by the framers of the Constitutional Convention, this idea that only landowners should be allowed to vote. Never made it in the Constitution. But a variation on this is now being proposed in the Arizona legislature. And State Representative John Kavanaugh, who's the chair of the committee that's pushing this legislation, says the quality of the vote is important. We have to look at the quality of votes as well. I've got a new video all about this for the supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Brad in Prattville, Alabama. Hey, Brad, what's on your mind?
Hey, so my question for you, Tom, is how does anybody run a multi-billion-dollar news organization, news in quotes, of course, and they have no major advertisers? They sell pillows, walk-in tubs, and catheters. My thought is they're probably receiving
Fox
money
so-called
from
news?
Somewhere. Absolutely. I didn't want to say it. I didn't know if I'd get banned for saying it. Kind of a dirty word around here. But
throw in the so-called.
How do you run a news corporation like that, or a media corporation, when you have no legitimate advertisers? People are talking about boycotting, but who are we going to boycott? Or are they
most
getting money
of their
to
revenue.
Agendas?
Finish your thought, Brad. I'm sorry. There's a little bit of latency here, so we step on each other.
No, that's okay. I was just saying, are they getting money to push an agenda from these? I don't know if you call them PAC organizations or oil billionaires and people like that to push.
No, it's not that devious. It's pretty straightforward. When cable providers when for-profit cable, this is not true of nonprofit cable providers like PBS or Free Speech TV, but when for-profit cable providers provide content to cable networks, the cable networks pay them for that content, and they pay them per month per subscriber. So I don't recall the exact number. It's been 4 or 5 years since I've read there was a really good roundup article about this in as I recall, the New York Times 4 or 5 years ago. But let's say it's $1 a subscriber. So if you've got, 100 million people who have cable TV, and every year each one of those cable TV companies has to give $1 for each subscriber to Fox News, then Fox News makes $100 million. They make more money off their cable TV fees than they do off their advertising. Or at least that was the case when I read this article several years ago. And it's why I reached out to the company that I get my cable TV from, which is Sling, which is owned by DirecTV, and said, can you simply remove, Fox altogether from my system? It's not that I don't watch them, it's that I don't even want them there because I don't want you to have to be taking $1 out of my $40 a month for my Sling subscription to give to Fox. And their response was, we have no control over that. The contract requires us to pay those fees to everybody that's on there, and we can't, selectively do that, or words to that effect. So that's how they do it, Brad.
The same. Yeah, if more people called in and told them the same thing, they might catch the drift. One other thing,
they could catch the drift, but they can't change the contract.
Yeah, I know you got a lot of truck drivers that listen to your program, and I'm one that travels for work. And I kept having the problem of missing half the show. About a month ago, I downloaded the Thom Hartmann app, and it is a lifesaver. I can listen to the entire show in about an hour and a half. And, sometimes I listen to it the next day. On Fridays, I don't work, so I'm watching on Free Speech Today. But I'm telling you, the Thom Hartmann app, plug it for the truck drivers out there or the people that work during the day that may not be able to listen to the whole show. It's a wonderful app. It's such a lifesaver,
thank you, Brad.
I appreciate it.
I appreciate that, and it's there. It's free. It's ads don't pop up on it. It is it's something that we put together. There's both an Android and an Apple version, and just so people could more easily listen to the show, or for our podcast subscribers, so that they could easily grab the podcast. Where we've stripped out the commercials and things like that. So the other app, by the way, I don't know, it looks to me like you're listening on SiriusXM. SiriusXM has an app that carries our show as well, and so there's a bunch of different ways to get the program. You can even say to your smart speaker, listen to the Thom Hartmann program, and it'll play it. But Brad, thank you. Thanks for the plug. That was very considerate of you. I'm not trying to encourage that from anybody else. Please don't feel any need to do that, but thank you for mentioning that. Susan in Decatur, Georgia. Hey, Susan, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I'm going to try to be as quick as I can. So
Thank you.
I've had, my entire Brown family has had Trump Derangement Syndrome for 4 years. We lived in an all-brown community in Norcross, Georgia, in Gwinnett. We got moved to a white part of Trump country, Gwinnett County, which is probably 70+% Trump people. And we were terrorized for 3 years. My children were screamed at the bus stop, saying, build the wall, by adults and children, white. Then some white children came into our yard and said, hey, to my kids, you want to play? I've got a game. Let's play Round Up the Mexicans, and I got a pickup truck. We're going to take them back over the border. So they did this even at the bus stop. They did it on the bus. Kids harassed my children on the bus. I reported it to Gwinnett County school principal, and they refused to do anything about it. They said, that's your problem. But if we could all get Medicare for all, maybe we could all get some mental health.
That's a great punctuation mark, Susan, and thank you. I'm so sorry we ran out of time. The hard breaks can be so frustrating, and your story was so compelling. I wish you the very best, and thank you for sharing your story with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code TOM. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartmann. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
Today we're reading from Behold America by Sarah Churchwell, The Entangled History of America First and the American Dream. This is from the prologue. On Monday, 30 May 1927, a cool day with showers forecast, New Yorkers were gathering for the annual Memorial Day parades around the city. It was only 9 years since the end of the European War, into which America had been so reluctantly drawn, and Europe had suddenly become closer than ever before. Precisely 10 days earlier, Charles Lindbergh had completed the first solo flight across the Atlantic in the spirit of St. Louis, and no one had yet stopped celebrating. Front pages around the country reported that Lucky Lindy had been mobbed in London, greeted by rapturous crowds of 150,000. Few Americans were talking about much else than the newest national hero, but in New York that day, different kinds of mobs were about to gather. Around 8 a.m., a group of Italian immigrants living in the Bronx set out for the elevated train on their way to Manhattan to join the parade. But they were not going to honor the American soldiers who had died in the service of their country. They were supporters of Mussolini, planning to join 400 American fascists who were marching in Manhattan's Memorial Day parade as part of the official fascist movement in the United States. They had been invited by the parade's organizers, to the outrage of many anti-fascists, including Italian nationalists and anarchists who threatened violence if the invitation wasn't rescinded. It wasn't. Like all his fellow fascists intending to march that day, Joseph Carisi was wearing the black shirt uniform, sporting leather boots, jodhpurs, a black cap, and carrying a steel-tipped riding crop. When he stopped to buy a newspaper, Carisi was jumped by two men, stabbed in the neck, and left to die on the sidewalk. Another fascist, Nicholas Amoroso, who was running either to catch up with his group or away from the killers, reports vary, was shot 4 times, once right through the heart. One of the two murdered men had served in the American Army during the Great War, the other with the Italian Army, papers reported. The parade they had meant to join took place without them, a fascist delegation of several hundred that was guarded by police to, quote, avert disorder. After the parade, the American blackshirts returned to their headquarters in the heart of Times Square. There, another of the fascists standing outside was set upon by 3 men. He defended himself with his riding crop as his fellow blackshirts charged out, brandishing clubs and whips, chasing the assailant through the theater traffic in Times Square, who fled as the black-shirted mob tore through the traffic. 100 fascists, reported the New York Times, rushed the attackers. A melee ensued that was quickly dispersed by the police. There was also violence in Brooklyn, where a parade of fascisti marched from the Angelo Rizza Fascista League at 274 Troutman Street in Bushwick. The LA Times reported several hundred men were parading, including 40 or 50 in the black shirt uniform. Fights broke out between supporters and protesters mingling on the sidewalks, and an anti-fascist was found lying on the ground, stabbed in the back. He survived and identified a fascist as his assailant. Accompanied by 30 police reserves to forestall violence, the marchers made their way through Brooklyn, stopping at the Wilson Avenue station, where the fascisti came to attention and gave the fascist salute. They ended at a Roman Catholic church, where the priest blessed them under large American and Italian flags, while the police remained on guard. The biggest outbreak of violence that Memorial Day, however, occurred in Queens, where it centered around a different right-wing group, not Italian Americans, but the self-proclaimed 100% American kind. By 1927, the Ku Klux Klan had spread across the United States since its rebirth in Georgia 12 years earlier. The first Klan was formed in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, as former Confederate soldiers in Tennessee created a secret society to promote white supremacism, and terrorize the newly freed slaves in the South during the Reconstruction era. The name is generally believed to have originated from the Greek word for circle, kuklos, while Klan pays homage to the mystified Celtic heritage supposedly shared by white Southerners. Within a decade or two, the first Klan had been successfully suppressed by law enforcement and died out by the turn of the century. But in 1915, it was resuscitated in Georgia, and by the early 1920s, the second Klan had achieved a powerful political presence in the United States, not only in the South, but across the country. I would add this is because of 1915, the movie Birth of a Nation came out. The Klan had an active presence in New York City and Long Island by 1927, with favorite slogans, which they even attempted to copyright at various points. That year, the Klan was quote, calling attention to the fact that it first announced the program of 100% Americanism and of America First. They were not, in fact, the first to adopt these mottos, as this book will show. In 1927, both phrases had been around for a decade or more. But as far as the Klan busily copywriting hate was concerned, America First belonged to them. And on Memorial Day in Queens, 1,000 or so of them had gathered to march, many in white robes and hoods. They were accompanied by 400 women from the so-called Clavana, the feminine branch of the Klan. Some of the reported 20,000 spectators in Queens that day objected to the Klan's presence, as others defended their right to march. Scuffles broke out, and it turned into a riot. Women fought women, and spectators fought the policemen and the Klansmen as their desire dictated, said a newspaper. Klan banners were shredded, and 5 of their number were arrested, said initial reports, while a few others were caught up in the confusion as well. The book, Behold America, Sarah Churchwell.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. 6 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the second hour of our program. And Congressman Ro Khanna is here with us for the hour, Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the 17th District of California in the U.S. House of Representatives. His website, Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep Ro. That's in R-O, Rep Ro Khanna is his Twitter handle. And Congressman Khanna, it's a lot under the bridge, as they say. You know, an awful lot has happened politically since the last time we spoke. Joe Biden's speech, a number of proposals, wackadoodle stuff coming out of the GOP. I'm wondering what's at the top of your mind, of your list, and the things that you would like our audience to be focusing on as we move into this new era here.
Well, Tom, I loved your column about how Biden had a transformative speech. Really, a defense of government is necessary in people's lives to help facilitate their freedoms and opportunities, and a rejection of Reaganism, and also a very eloquent column about all of the ways that race has been embedded in our history, and whether that has been in our immigration policy, whether it has been in denying people the right to vote, whether it has been in denying justice in the criminal justice system, and you go in through all of it. So to say that we are somehow oblivious to race as the Republican response to just is factually inaccurate. But there's a real opportunity. I mean, this is the first time in my lifetime that you've had a president really defend the role of government as essential to a good society. So I'm excited when Congress gets back in session to getting to work on the infrastructure plan and the family relief plan.
Is that Monday of next week?
It's Monday of next week. I mean, we've got committee hearings and things going on right now, but the formal voting starts. Actually, it starts not next week. It starts the week after. But we have a lot of committee hearings and working on infrastructure, working on what the progressive priorities should be. The president gave a very aspirational speech. Now we don't want it to be diluted in the formal legislation. Let's pass what he's proposing. We have the majorities. The policies he's proposing are deeply popular. We need to pass them.
Great. Thank you. So, pick up phone calls?
That sounds great.
Okay, let's do this. And just, for anybody who might just be tuning in, Congressman Khanna, Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, representative from the 17th District of California, will be with us for the entire hour taking your calls. And Keno in Lakeland, Florida. Keno, our ex-Republican, you are on the line with Congressman Khanna.
I am now a member of the Green Party after 50 years of the Republican Party, and I have a special favor to ask of Congressman Khanna. The female Asian elephants in America want to have babies, but the breeding program has been stopped because all the males are too closely related, and the Endangered Species Act prohibits either new bull elephants or female or male semen from bull elephants to be brought in. So the endangered species are going to die out here in America if we don't bring in some bull elephants from India, in honor of Ganesh, the Hindu elephant god. So, Congressman, can you help bring some bull elephants to America to breed the females so we can start having some more Asian elephant babies in America?
Well, it's the first I'm hearing about that issue. I'm happy to look into it. I mean, obviously, India has been on my mind this week, and we're doing everything we can, given the awful humanitarian crisis with COVID, just to get oxygen there, to get PPE there, to make sure that we could get our vaccines licensed there. And, Tom, let me just bring this issue up because it's so important. Pfizer and Moderna are refusing to sell vaccines to not just India, but 100 countries around the world. This is going to come for a vote May 5th. We need a TRIPS waiver, which doesn't mean that we're asking pharmaceutical companies to give these vaccines away for free. What we're saying is they should be forced to license them, to be paid for them, and they should not be allowed to hoard them and deny every other country the ability to manufacture. So that's the crisis currently in India that we're working on. But I hear you about the elephants. If you write to my office, and I'm happy to look into it and see what we can do.
What's TRIPS that we need to have waived?
So TRIPS, Tom, this is I think is one of the key moral issues of our time. Right now, there are about 100 countries that do not have the ability to use the vaccine formula for Pfizer or Moderna to make their own vaccines. So Pfizer and Moderna are basically choosing which contract manufacturers to allow. And Pfizer got this technology, the mRNA technology, from two Turkish couples from a Turkish couple who invented it. That couple, through BioNTech, basically said, okay, we're going to be the exclusive suppliers to Germany and Turkey, and they partnered with someone to supply China, and Pfizer got exclusive jurisdiction over the rest of the world. And Pfizer has been selective in only operating with a few select contract manufacturers. So if they don't give you, and they've gotten requests from manufacturers around the world, and they're simply refusing to give them the vaccine formula to be able to manufacture it. This is why we have had a dismal rate of getting people in other parts of the world vaccinated. What TRIPS would do is it would say that you're required as a compulsory matter to license your IP in this medical case to any contract manufacturer, any company that wants it, any country that wants it, they're required to pay you a fair rate for it. And we did this before President Bush with drugs regarding AIDS. President Biden needs to support that waiver of IP, and it's going to come to a head in about a week.
Is that, a dear friend of mine, Ellen Ratner, who knows Bush and is a great Democrat, used to say, the one good thing George Bush did is he saved millions of lives in Africa. Is that how he did it, by pushing through essentially this waiver on the TRIPS waiver? Again, I'm still not sure what the acronym stands for, but is that how Bush accomplished that?
That was one of the things, and then he also gave direct aid of $5 billion or so and set up a fund and had U.S. assistance. But the waiver was a huge part of it. And, there are two common misconceptions. One is, well, are we just asking Pfizer or Moderna to give it away? No, you're not. You get compensated based on the license. But what Pfizer and Moderna want to do cynically is to maintain a monopoly on it so that they get to determine the distribution, so that they get to determine the vaccine, the boosters, and most importantly, they don't want a generic alternative coming. That would be even understandable if they had anywhere near the manufacturing capacity to vaccinate the rest of the world, but they don't. And so what you have is this really cruel situation where they're refusing to sell. They're refusing to sell the formula, and you've got countries like India stuck simply with AstraZeneca, which is not an mRNA technology. It can't be scaled as fast. It is not sufficient to be able to vaccinate their population. And there are 100 other countries in this situation. South Africa, India, many emerging countries have asked the WTO to waive the IP requirement and require licensing.
Intellectual property.
The administration, the intellectual property. So far, President Biden has refused to do so, even though he explicitly promised. Andy Barkin tweeted this out. He has a video where he asks candidate Biden, will you promise to waive this? Will you make sure that everyone has access to the vaccine? And President Biden said absolutely, emphatically yes. And the only reason we wouldn't waive this is pure pharma greed. It would be that Pfizer and Moderna want a monopoly on this. And Moderna got the IP from NIH, so they got it from taxpayers. Pfizer got a $2 billion guarantee from us, U.S. taxpayers, and they got the technology from a Turkish couple. So it is just inexcusable.
I get it. I totally get it. Congressman Ro Khanna with us for the hour, taking your calls. I'll stop with the questions, I promise. Taking your calls for the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Khanna, Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, representing the 17th District of California in the U.S. House.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov is his website. You can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna. Drop him a tweet and say hi. And welcome back. Fred in Yorkville, California. You listening on KZYX. Hey, Fred, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good morning, gentlemen. I have a few ideas about gun control that I'd kind of like to throw out there and see if any of them stick. And since we have Congressman Khanna with us, this is the perfect time.
Go for it.
Okay.
Yes, Fred.
I believe in the Second Amendment. We should be able to have guns, but we need some serious restrictions. And here's legislation I'd like to see. You want to have a gun? You go to the DMV, you take a test, you prove that you know something about basic gun safety, and you can tell the difference between a deer and a German Shepherd, then you get a license. And then you commit a crime with that gun, you go away for a long time, and you have that license taken away. If you commit a crime with a gun you're forbidden to have, you go away for an even longer time. Automatic military assault weapons with high-capacity magazines, absolutely not. Nobody but soldiers should have those weapons. So you have a buyback with a deadline. We will buy back these weapons from you until the deadline. If you get caught with them after that, it's not going to go well for you. We're going to lock you up for a long time. So we have to pass some serious gun laws and enforce them. What do you think about that? Could we get something like that through the Congress?
Well, I think it's common sense. I mean, what you're saying is that you should have a safety test before using a gun, just like we have to have a license to use an automobile, and a gun is far more dangerous, and that there should be some liability if you misuse that and if you abuse it. That seems to be common sense. It does not infringe on your right to own a gun, just like requiring a license for an automobile doesn't infringe on your right to travel. The question is, can we have the political will to have these kind of ideas implemented?
Susan in Beaverton, Oregon, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna. Minute to the break,
hi.
by the way.
Thank you, Rep. Khanna, for all you do. I know you're on the Agriculture Committee with Cory Booker. In fact, I think you are. And I'm wondering what you're going to do about animal agriculture and factory farm, which is one of the biggest things that contribute to climate change. In fact, I'm not sure we can solve it without dealing with that. So I'm just wondering what your plans are. And then I know talking about these things will drive the Republicans crazy. So what are we going to do about that?
Susan, thank you. Cory Booker and I have a bill exactly on this, on the CAFOs, the large concentrated farms that have extraordinary runoff, that are huge pollutants into the environment, which mistreat the animals. And what we have said is that we need to have a moratorium on building new ones, and we need to have the liability not on the family farmer, but on these large conglomerate farms, which are owned by people outside the community. So take a look at the Farm Reform Act, and we're going to try to push it.
It's called the Farm Reform Act?
Yes, that Cory Booker and I introduced last Congress, and we'll introduce it again this Congress.
Great. Congressman Ro Khanna with us, taking your calls for the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls for the Congressman in just a moment. Rep Ro Khanna on Twitter. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So people wonder, why militias all of a sudden? How is it that all kinds of Americans are showing up with assault weapons in the Capitol building, trying to assassinate the Vice President of the United States and the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and stop the counting of the presidential votes, the Electoral College votes? Where did this come from? You know, the last time we saw an armed uprising against the federal government in the United States was 1861. It was the Confederacy. Is this a Confederacy rising again? Well, yeah, there is a huge white supremacist element to it. In fact, I'd say it's one of the primary animating impulses. But what really got these things going, these militias going, was the Heller decision written by the opinion written by Antonin Scalia and published on June 26, 2008. And it has crazy language in it, basically begging for militias. I share it with you in a special video over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. Congressman Ro Khanna is on the line with us, taking your calls for the hour. Calvin in Dighton, Kansas. Am I saying that right, Calvin?
Yep, you sure are, Tom.
You are on the air.
My question is, give me one gun control law that is actually going to curb the violence. You use Chicago as an example. Guys from Illinois can just jump over to Indiana. Well, no, they can't. The state law in Indiana is you must be a resident in order to purchase. That means they're buying the guns illegally, Calvin, if they're going over there.
It is absolutely not enforced. But Congressman, and in fact, it is a fascinating story. I got an email this morning from, I don't want to be doing my show. Congressman, it's your response.
Well, let me give two to Dutton I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, the two very common sense examples. Let's say you know someone who has a gun and they're threatening to do harm to themselves or to a family member or to the community. Right now, you can't do anything about that. Shouldn't you at least be allowed to go to court and have a judge temporarily take that gun away from a person who may be ready to do harm to themselves or a family member? And then you could say, well, they could get a gun anyway. Usually they won't. There'll be a cooling off period. The second thing is having a background check and a waiting period before someone goes to guns. Studies have shown that would actually reduce violence, because a lot of times people will rush to buy a gun if they've had a dispute, they've had an argument, they've had a dispute with their partner, and that leads to a devastating consequence. The studies have shown just having a waiting period will reduce the likelihood of violence. So there's actually been research on this. These things have been proven to work, and it's just a lack of political will in getting them done.
And the story I was looking for just this morning, one of the people at our radio station in Chicago, WCPT, sent me this. This is from the local paper, the Denver Channel paper. The city of Chicago is suing an Indiana gun store it claims has sold more than 850 illegal firearms that have been recovered at crime scenes in Chicago. They're suing this store in Gary, Indiana. They say they have, quote, engaged in a pattern of illegal sales that has resulted in the flow of hundreds, if not thousands, of illegal firearms into the city of Chicago. So just, for reference. Mick in Seattle. Mick, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your activism and awareness for issues. Congressmember Khanna, this is in your own backyard. I was born and raised in California, grew up in the Silicon Valley, which was once the prune capital of the world. It comes as no surprise to me that off the coast of California recently it was surveyed that 250,000 barrels of DDT are sitting in barrels that are, of course, corroded and exposing high levels of DDT to the surrounding marine life. Example, the sea lions. Can you tell me what you plan on doing about this?
Well, thank you, Nick. I believe that we need to make sure that our EPA is regulating the DDT and working to remove it. And we need to make sure that that removal is taking place. So if you want to write in more to my office about specifics, I'm happy to act on it. Otherwise, I'll continue to reach out to the EPA on the issue.
Now, this is a pretty new story, Congressman. There was a big article about it in Nature magazine just the day before yesterday that I can forward to you if you'd like. That
would be great.
It's pretty
That'd
grim.
be great.
Yeah, this was a company back in the 60s and 70s that apparently dumped this stuff when it became illegal, and some of it is the waste byproduct of manufacturing, and it's all out in the ocean. Steve in St. Genevieve, Missouri, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey, Tom. Hey, Congressman. My question is, shouldn't the United States be helping Mexico when it comes to this vaccine? Because I have friends that live down there. Puerto Vallarta is where I like to go. And my Mexican friends down there are telling me that they don't even have their most vulnerable vaccinated fully yet. And they're saying that they're getting, I believe, the Chinese version of the vaccine and also the Russian vaccine, which I believe the Russian vaccine is less effective. I think we need maybe Moderna and Pfizer down there because, let's face it, they're our neighbors, and we do a lot of business with them, tourism-wise as well. I'll take my...
Thank you,
You're
Steve.
absolutely right. I mean, so what we need to do, in my view, is to help them actually with the manufacturing and with the technical know-how to allow them to develop the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines to vaccinate their population instead of having to rely on the Russians or the Chinese. But instead, we're not even allowing them to buy these vaccines from us and to do their own manufacturing. And that's what we were talking about earlier, that at the very least we need to require licensing of the vaccine formula so they can manufacture the vaccines for themselves.
This goes back to those TRIPS waivers.
Exactly, Tom. It's an issue that really ought to be May 5th is the decision, and I think it's one of the key moral issues of our time, and not enough people are talking about it.
You're listening
Agreed.
to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
After the break here at the bottom of the hour, we will continue with your calls for Congressman Ro Khanna, Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, representing the U.S. or California in the U.S. House of Representatives. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Ezra Klein's new book, Why We're Polarized. This is from the introduction, and it's a couple pages into it. I'm starting out here. I have found that American politics is best understood by braiding two forms of knowledge that are often left separate: the direct on-the-ground insights shared by politicians, activists, government officials, and other subjects of my reporting, and the more systemic analyses conducted by political scientists, sociologists, historians, and others with the time, methods, and expertise to study American politics at scale. On their own, political actors often ignore the incentives shaping their decisions, and academic researchers miss the human motivations that drive political decision-making. Together, however, they shine bright light on how and why American politics works the way it does. There's much awry in American politics, and I won't in this book attempt to catalog all of it. But I've come to believe the master story, the one that drives almost all divides and most fundamentally shapes the behavior of participants, is the logic of polarization. That logic, put simply, is this: to appeal to a more polarized public, political institutions and political actors behave in more polarized ways. As political institutions and actors become more polarized, they further polarize the public. This sets off a feedback cycle. To appeal to a yet more polarized public, institutions must polarize further. When faced with yet more polarized institutions, the public polarizes further, and so on. Understanding that we exist in relationship with our political institutions, that they are changed by us and we are changed by them, is the key to this story. We don't just use politics for our own ends. Politics uses us for its own ends. There are many different types of polarization possible, and I'll discuss some of them later in the book, but the locus of polarization I'll discuss is on political identity. And that requires saying a few words about a term that should be very useful in American politics, but that has become almost useless: identity politics. A core argument of this book is that everyone engaged in American politics is engaged in identity politics. This is not an insult, and it's not controversial. We form and fold identities constantly, naturally. Identity is present in politics in the way gravity, evolution, or cognition is present in politics. That is to say, it is omnipresent in politics because it is omnipresent in us. There is no way to read the literature on how humans form and protect their personal and group identities, literature I will survey in this book, and believe that any of us is immune. It runs so deep in our psyches, so activated so easily by even weak cues and distant threats, that it is impossible to speak seriously about how we engage with one another without discussing how our identities shape that engagement. Unfortunately, the term identity politics has been weaponized. It is most often used by speakers to describe politics as practiced by members of historically marginalized groups. If you're black and you're worried about police brutality, that's identity politics. If you're a woman and you're worried about the male-female pay gap, that's identity politics. But if you're a rural gun owner decrying universal background checks as tyranny, or a billionaire CEO complaining that high tax rates demonize success, or a Christian insisting on nativity scenes in public squares, well, that's just good old-fashioned politics. With a quick sleight of hand, identity becomes something that only marginalized groups have. The term identity politics in this usage obscures rather than illuminates. It's used to diminish and discredit the concerns of weaker groups by making them look self-interested, special pleading in order to clear the agenda for the concerns of stronger groups, which are framed as more rational, proper topics for normal political debate. But in wielding identity as a blade, we have lost it as a lens, blinding ourselves in a bid for political advantage.
We're left searching in vain for what we refuse to allow ourselves to see. All politics is influenced by identity. Those identities are most powerful when they are so pervasive as to be either invisible or uncontroversial. American is an identity. So too is Christian. When politicians, including the irreligious, end speeches with "God bless America," it's not because they're making an appeal to a higher power, but because they're making an appeal to our bedrock identities. If you don't believe me, ask yourself why there are so few open atheists or even agnostics in national politics. This does not mean that politics is an equation solved by locating identity. Identity shapes our worldview, but it does not mechanistically decide it. And while we often speak of identity as a singular, it is always a dizzying plural. We have countless identities, some of them in active conflict with each other, others lying dormant until activated by threat or fortune. Much that happens in political campaigns is best understood as a struggle over which identities voters will inhabit come Election Day. Will they feel like workers exploited by their bosses, or heartlanders dismissed by coastal elites? Will they vote as patriotic traditionalists offended by NFL players who kneel during the national anthem, or as parents worried about the climate their children will inhabit? What we are often fighting over in American politics is group identity and status, fights that express themselves in debates over policy and power, but cannot be truly reconciled by either. Health policy is positive-sum, but identity conflict is zero-sum. The book, Why We're Polarized, by Ezra Klein.
Nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. 34 minutes past the hour. Congressman Ro Khanna, Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, representing the 17th District of California in the U.S. House of Representatives. Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov is his website. You can tweet him at Rep Ro Khanna. He is with us for the hour, taking your calls in our National Progressive Town Hall meeting. Gerald in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, you are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, I just wanted to make the comment that Fox News, to me, is oxymoronic. And I was wondering, because I keep hearing monopolies with the pharmaceutical industry, why couldn't the antitrust laws, which I think are still in effect, be used to break them up if they don't start producing the vaccines and distributing them? Thank you.
Thank you, Gerald.
Gerald, a great question, and I don't know what the market share of Pfizer or Moderna is in terms of antitrust law. What I do know is that the intellectual property that there is giving them basically a monopoly right. So they basically have a monopoly over this vaccine. And what we're saying, many of us who've been advocating for the TRIPS waiver, is if they're going to have this intellectual property right, the very least they need to be doing is licensing that technology, and that would help counter the extreme monopoly power they have. So I think having that intellectual property reform is what we need.
David in Columbus, Ohio, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Congressman, have the Republicans given up on prosecuting Trump for sedition and suborning perjury and intimidating federal witnesses? And it's a whole list of crimes. And I don't think he should get away with this.
David, I believe that the Justice Department is looking into all of this. I actually think President Biden has taken the exact right approach, which is that it's not a political issue. He didn't know anything about the Giuliani investigation. I'm sure neither he nor anyone at the White House is involved in the investigations against Trump. But he's letting the U.S. attorney's offices and the Justice Department take its course and conduct the investigations and hold any individual accountable, whether that's Trump or anyone who worked for him.
Patrick in Chicago, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Representatives. Hi, Tom. I'm just going to launch right into it. So we've all heard Tom quote poll numbers, and you've probably heard people complain about poll data, saying, who are they polling, or how do they get their numbers? Well, I think what you guys should do is use your primary election infrastructure to host an open bipartisan ballot referendum drive this year on Election Day in November and you guys can have 10 issues, clear and direct, bipartisan, like Medicare for all, voting IDs, that would simple yes, no, unsure options to choose, and then you take whatever the top 5 are, bipartisan, put them on massive banners and use those results to push legislation next year. And if successful, you can repeat it every year.
Patrick, I think it's a good idea to figure out ways of getting more direct citizen feedback from on our issues and what we should do. Of course, we know a lot of these things are popular. We know Medicare for all polls off the charts. We know that most of President Biden's agenda of having child care, of having a free public college, of having increased funding on infrastructure polls off the charts. So the obstacle seems to me not public opinion, but special interests and lobbyists that always manage to slow things down. And what we have to do is figure out how we get around that.
Ryan, in Modesto, California, you are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey, Congressman, I'm wondering if you have any insight on what the status is of the For the People Act in the Senate. I'm really concerned that nothing will happen before next year's midterms. I just think that even if it's a scaled-back version that doesn't include all of the campaign finance reform in the For the People Act, if we can get something that includes just basic protections like early voting, automatic voter registration, nonpartisan gerrymandering, et cetera, just basic national protections for national elections should not be controversial.
Ryan, I agree with you 110%. And it's a moral issue, but it's also a pragmatic issue. If they don't have voting rights legislation that protects people's right to vote, absentee that protects polling places, you're going to have a disaster in the midterms because the Republicans will rig each of these states to disempower, disenfranchise black voters, Latino voters. And the deadline isn't 2022. The deadline is approaching by this summer because you need to give enough time for the courts to look at it and review it. And otherwise, you'd have some district court judge overturn it, and the Supreme Court won't get to it until after the election. So Senator Schumer and Pelosi are aware of this. I believe they're going to have a narrower bill focused on what you are focused on and insist that not require a filibuster. And if they can't get it through, then the filibuster is in question, and Schumer has said as much.
Charles in Miami, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
How you doing, Tom? And how you doing, Congressman Khanna?
Good.
Hi.
Right. Okay, great. I was listening to Fox News this morning. I don't know how I got there. But you had this sheriff, he's the freshman congressman from Texas, and they're promoting him as someone who wants to talk to Biden on police reform. But during his whole rant, he was upset that he feels policemen are unappreciated and they're not getting the respect, and Democrats are essentially, and when they call it radical left, I just think they're terming it. That's their racist term for black people and minorities, and any person of color. So my question is this: he wants to not call it police reform, and he is saying it's criminal justice. And I guess I'm trying to say, are you guys progressive? Are you guys going to stand up for us? Because we voted, we waited in line, we voted, and we wanted results. And it's not a matter of Democrats and Republicans coming together at this point when actually they, invaded the Capitol and tried to overturn democracy. It's a point now, are you guys going to stand up for your voters? Your voters come first. And are you going to, set the agenda and give us everything that you promised us? And as the progressives, are you guys willing to, put a stop to whatever Joe Manchin is doing by also saying we'll block everything going to West Virginia and any legislation? And, I'm depending on you, Congressman Khanna. We love what you do, and keep on fighting for us. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you for your passion, and I agree with you completely that we have to deliver on police reform. We have to deliver, given the incidents almost every week that we're seeing in the news, given how much of an issue this is about racial justice, particularly when you talk to young people. I mean, this is a moral case. It is a issue about racial justice. And we've passed it in the House, the Police Justice Act, that says force needs to be a last resort, like every other industrialized Western democracy, that you can't have chokeholds, that you can't have no warrant, door knocking down of doors. These things are common sense, and we have to prioritize getting it passed through the Senate and, again, be willing to do it without a filibuster. But, I thought the president was overly decent with the sheriff, a freshman member of Congress, monopolized 2 minutes of his time, and President Biden just stood there and patiently listened to him. So, I'm not sure that's really in any good faith. And if he has good faith ideas, we're willing to listen. But what is he proposing to do on the police abuse and police violence?
Tony in Fort Worth, Texas. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, good afternoon, gentlemen. Congressman Khanna, I am a licensed registered. I've jumped through every hoop to get every firearm that I've got, and I keep hearing more about we need more gun laws to make it tougher for the bad guys to buy a gun. What are your plans to address the issue of stolen guns?
Tony, I appreciate that, and this is where I think Tom's proposal is absolutely correct, which is some liability regime, right? I mean, if you own a gun and a firearm, and you should have some reasonable duty of care and some standards. Now, if you take those reasonable duties of care, fine, then you're not liable. But if you don't have a reasonable duty of care, then there should be some liability. And unless you have laws that impose a standard of care, then I don't see how you're going to incentivize the proper behavior.
Yeah, I'm also suggesting that guns be registered just like cars are, so they're easier to track. And in theory, that's happening, but with all these gun shows, and now we've got these ghost guns and things. Your thoughts on that? We just have 40 seconds to the break.
I mean, I'm for registered guns. I mean, it seems, though, that we don't move forward in this country. I remember Bill Bradley's big idea when he ran for president in 2000 was, let's get guns registered. And now it's 2021, and we're still talking about the same thing. So, I think what people find infuriating about this debate is all the ideas are out there. Nothing happens. I mean, since I've been in Congress, imagine that, Tom. I've been coming on the show for 5 years in Congress, and we haven't passed a single piece of legislation on guns through the House and the Senate that the president has signed in my entire tenure in the United States Congress. I mean, that should tell you all you need to know right there.
Yeah, it really does. And about the power of the NRA that the Supreme Court has handed to all these special interest groups. Congressman Ro Khanna is taking your calls for the hour. Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, representing the 17th District of California, the Silicon Valley area, in the U.S. House of Representatives. Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov is his website, and you can tweet him at @RepRoKhanna. We'll be right back with more of your calls.
Listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's our National Progressive Town Hall meeting with Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls. And welcome back. Joe in Cupertino, California, you are on the air with your congressman.
Rep. Khanna, I really felt so sad to watch TV in the last couple of days. I just can't tell you, but that's not why I called. I appreciate all that you do, and I saw you on Amy yesterday. I thought that was wonderful. The economist question is today my concern. Professor Wolf suggests that if we buy American, that's somehow going to affect national policy. I remember back in the old days when Reagan was a president, we were having to do a reduction in force. But I saw that we are procuring Coast Guard cutters from Singapore Technologies, although we're building them in America. We're also getting lithium batteries that are produced by an Australian company in California. As a person of oversight, can we make sure that the businesses that we are going to do with the Green New Deal and all the stuff that's going to happen stays American so that we can make this country what is being proposed?
Joe, absolutely. And this is part of President Biden's speech, that we need to make sure that we're making these things in America, buying in America. The challenge with the lithium-ion batteries is we just don't have enough manufacturing capacity right now in the United States to supply all our needs. And that's why we need industrial policy in this country, where our government partners with the private sector to create the factories to build new lithium-ion plants. And I think it would be wonderful to do this as part of infrastructure or jobs, where you could have President Biden going out to Michigan, Wisconsin, standing there with a CEO and saying, look, we're opening this new plant to produce batteries, new plant to make electric vehicles, and that would help truly revitalize manufacturing in this country.
Ed in Roselle, Illinois, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, Congressman, I'm interested in if you have any updates on the status of legislation requiring internet literacy to be taught in our public schools. Is there any kind of bill or any kind of movement on that?
Ed, it's a very good idea. We've discussed, I think, this before on the show with digital literacy. Finland does an extraordinary job where they really prepare people to deal with disinformation, to think critically, and it's something that I have proposed. There's legislation, but whether we can get it to the point of actually becoming law is going to require the White House's engagement and focus. And we should be able to do that after the two things the president has already proposed on infrastructure. Once we turn to issues of technology, I think this is something that could have bipartisan support.
It seems. Could we include civics and critical thinking in there too? We just have
absolutely. We need to. I mean, we need to have a broader conversation about basic history, basic critical thinking, basic understanding of knowing that not everything you read on the internet is true. And it seems that this is critical to any educational curriculum.
Yeah. Our public schools are in need of a of a little help in this area. They've been kneecapped ever since Bill Bennett came along. It's coming up on. Go ahead.
Brief aside, which I've never understood, is all these colleges are becoming so much more competitive. It takes perfect scores to get in anywhere, and yet they're producing people bluntly who aren't writing and aren't thinking. I mean, it's the we're so focused on the test scores and perfection that we're forgetting some of the basics.
Yeah, I think you're seeing the result of these crash course study school things also. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So David Perry over at Medium.com put together a list of 38 reasons to investigate the Trump administration. Everything from the Russian influence over the 2016 election, to the Trump family's collusion with Russia, to Ivanka Trump's trademarks, to federal spending at Trump properties, to the civilians killed by Trump's drone strikes, to the Trump administration's role in turning the United States into the global epicenter for the COVID-19 pandemic. Yes, we are. Yes, it's grim. Their decision to sideline the CDC, politicizing mask wearing just to try to get himself reelected, the number of people who died because the White House kept PPE from blue states, from Democratic-led states, the contents of the Trump documents that Trump refused to release to the House Judiciary Committee and other committees, all the people who wouldn't speak, at all, ignoring subpoenas, violations of the Hatch Act, the deportation of COVID-positive immigrant families, illegal altering of records. Anyhow, there's a whole list. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. Congressman Ro Khanna on the line with us, taking your calls for the hour. Jeremiah in Coalport, Pennsylvania. You are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey, Congressman. I live in central rural Pennsylvania, and the cell phone reception here is very lousy. And as long as we have for-profit corporations in charge of providing this service, it's going to continue to be lousy. So I wanted to know, is there money in the infrastructure bill for rural cell phoneification? Or, and if there isn't, what can we do about the fact that, what can we do to get cell phone service to the rural areas. And keep in mind, if this is something that you address, you'll get votes from people in rural areas, which are typically difficult to do for Democratic politicians.
Sure, it's a great idea. I mean, we've been so focused on the internet and broadband, affordable internet, but you're right about the cell phone. And I remember from my time on the trail with Bernie Sanders, when we started going through rural communities for miles, the cell phone service wouldn't work. I will get back to you in whether I don't think it's specifically in the infrastructure plan, though I need to look. And I do agree with you that we need municipalities or cooperatives to get the contracts for laying out the cell service there, because the private companies don't have an advantage. But let me find out whether it's in the bill or not, and if it's not, I'll advocate for it. It's an outstanding point.
Jim in Long Beach, Texas, you are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good morning, Tom. Good morning, Representative. I'm in California, and my question is: would you support?
California.
California. Would you support a legislation for a universal green income, not basic green, to start moving the state of California into an eco-sustainable state and hopefully lead the world?
Jim, I mean, I'm all for moving California into an environmentally sustainable state and making those investments and making sure that the new jobs are being created there. I think that was your question, unless I missed part of it.
Yeah, I think that was it. Adam in Rochester Hills, Michigan, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey guys, how you doing today? Okay, Congressman, my question is this: I come from a family that's heavy in law enforcement. Got a lot of friends in law enforcement, and a lot of these incidents and these contexts that wind up going bad, they stem from law enforcement responding to people breaking laws. I say, is there a way that we can nip it in the bud? Nobody wants to have contact with police officers, even if it ends in a quote-unquote good encounter. There's all these laws that are victimless, all this behavior that's been criminalized. Can we go about decriminalizing a lot of these laws, and it'll make a huge impact on the number of encounters? I agree 100%. There needs to be reform, but let's actually deal with the root issue. Let's stop criminalizing behavior. Is there any move to decriminalize nonsense?
Adam, it's a brilliant point. I mean, what you're basically advocating is the reverse of the broken window theory. I mean, what you saw that Giuliani and others did with great fanfare and bragging about it is they wanted to criminalize the smallest of infractions, things like graffiti on walls, street litter, and the theory was that if they would criminalize that, then that would somehow arrest the city from having larger crime. Of course, it's been debunked, that theory, but what it led to, as you put it, is more interactions, more possibilities of something going wrong between police and civilians, the over-criminalization of the state. And I think talking about how we decriminalize things that shouldn't be criminal is an absolutely essential part of police reform. So I appreciate your raising it.
The last minute of the hour, John in San Francisco. Got a quick one for Congressman Khanna?
No, actually, Tom, I don't. But I would like to say that that caller, Carlos, that called in, this is our political revolution, and it's not fought with guns and ammunition. It's fought with elections, voting, and debate. And if that works for you, you might mention that, because for 6 months now, we've had new people come taking power. But what I wanted to talk about with Rep. Khanna was, why have we not put together a 50-state plus protectorate program where we fight fires in the summer and manage forests in the winter?
Yeah. John, I'm going to cut you off there. We only have 15 seconds left. Congressman?
John, we need to do a better job with the prescribed burns. I do think the governor is more prepared this summer. There's been large allocation for having a fire response, emergency response team and better technology. But you're right, we need more prescriber and enforce management.
Congressman, thanks so much for being with us today. I look forward to the next time you're on the program. Thank you.
Thank you. Always learn from your listeners, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and back at you. Thank you so much. Congressman Ro Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov is the website. You can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna. We'll be back with Anything Goes Friday. Your calls right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Those in the know.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code TOM. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Ezra Klein's new book, Why We're Polarized. This is from the introduction, and it's a couple pages into it. I'm starting out here. I have found that American politics is best understood by braiding two forms of knowledge that are often left separate: the direct on-the-ground insights shared by politicians, activists, government officials, and other subjects of my reporting, and the more systemic analyses conducted by political scientists, sociologists, historians, and others with the time, methods, and expertise to study American politics at scale. On their own, political actors often ignore the incentives shaping their decisions, and academic researchers miss the human motivations that drive political decision-making. Together, however, they shine bright light on how and why American politics works the way it does. There's much awry in American politics, and I won't in this book attempt to catalog all of it. But I've come to believe the master story, the one that drives almost all divides and most fundamentally shapes the behavior of participants, is the logic of polarization. That logic, put simply, is this: to appeal to a more polarized public, political institutions and political actors behave in more polarized ways. As political institutions and actors become more polarized, they further polarize the public. This sets off a feedback cycle. To appeal to a yet more polarized public, institutions must polarize further. When faced with yet more polarized institutions, the public polarizes further, and so on. Understanding that we exist in relationship with our political institutions, that they are changed by us and we are changed by them, is the key to this story. We don't just use politics for our own ends. Politics uses us for its own ends. There are many different types of polarization possible, and I'll discuss some of them later in the book, but the locus of polarization I'll discuss is on political identity. And that requires saying a few words about a term that should be very useful in American politics, but that has become almost useless: identity politics. A core argument of this book is that everyone engaged in American politics is engaged in identity politics. This is not an insult, and it's not controversial. We form and fold identities constantly, naturally. Identity is present in politics in the way gravity, evolution, or cognition is present in politics. That is to say, it is omnipresent in politics because it is omnipresent in us. There is no way to read the literature on how humans form and protect their personal and group identities, literature I will survey in this book, and believe that any of us is immune. It runs so deep in our psyches, so activated so easily by even weak cues and distant threats, that it is impossible to speak seriously about how we engage with one another without discussing how our identities shape that engagement. Unfortunately, the term identity politics has been weaponized. It is most often used by speakers to describe politics as practiced by members of historically marginalized groups. If you're black and you're worried about police brutality, that's identity politics. If you're a woman and you're worried about the male-female pay gap, that's identity politics. But if you're a rural gun owner decrying universal background checks as tyranny, or a billionaire CEO complaining that high tax rates demonize success, or a Christian insisting on nativity scenes in public squares, well, that's just good old-fashioned politics. With a quick sleight of hand, identity becomes something that only marginalized groups have. The term identity politics in this usage obscures rather than illuminates. It's used to diminish and discredit the concerns of weaker groups by making them look self-interested. Special pleading in order to clear the agenda for the concerns of stronger groups, which are framed as more rational, proper topics for normal political debate. But in wielding identity as a blade, we have lost it as a lens, blinding ourselves in a bid for political advantage. We're left searching in vain for what we refuse to allow ourselves to see. All politics is influenced by identity. Those identities are most powerful when they are so pervasive as to be either invisible or uncontroversial. American is an identity. So too is Christian. When politicians, including the irreligious, end speeches with "God bless America," it's not because they're making an appeal to a higher power, but because they're making an appeal to our bedrock identities. If you don't believe me, ask yourself why there are so few open atheists or even agnostics in national politics. This does not mean that politics is an equation solved by locating identity. Identity shapes our worldview, but it does not mechanistically decide it. And while we often speak of identity as a singular, it is always a dizzying plural. We have countless identities, some of them in active conflict with each other, others lying dormant until activated by threat or fortune. Much that happens in political campaigns is best understood as a struggle over which identities voters will inhabit come election day. Will they feel like workers exploited by their bosses, or heartlanders dismissed by coastal elites? Will they vote as patriotic traditionalists offended by NFL players who kneel during the national anthem, or as parents worried about the climate their children will inhabit? What we are often fighting over in American politics is group identity and status. Fights that express themselves in debates over policy and power, but cannot be truly reconciled by either. Health policy is positive-sum, but identity conflict is zero-sum. The book, Why We're Polarized, by Ezra Klein.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. It's Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Just a couple quick things here to share with you. Newsmax host has gone off on Joe Biden for giving his wife a dandelion. How dare he? He picked a dandelion from the lawn of the White House and handed it to Jill. Hey, here's a flower. And over on this so-called news network there, is he promoting asthma? It's like, really? Meanwhile, I shared with you a couple days ago the story about these anti-maskers who showed up at the school to encourage the children to refuse to wear masks and harass the teachers. And they were carrying these signs, "Unmask the kids." The Arizona Daily Star reported on this. And at the time, we didn't have all the details, and I assumed that a few of these people were just like wackadoodle parents dropping off their kids and coming out with the signs, maybe something they'd organized on Facebook or whatever. Turns out none of these people even have kids in this school. It's just, and in fact, this, from Raw Story here, well, actually, it's via the Arizona Daily Star, that the crowd made up of parents and others who had no ties to the district or even to Pima County refused to wear masks inside the building as required. Some protesters yelled at staff while pushing past them. A few were even armed. The goal was to get the district to drop its mask mandate, and that's when they called the police. The sheriff's deputies responded. They couldn't get the growing crowd to leave, so they adjourned the meeting, and that was it. They note, in recent months, anti-mask demonstrators have caused unrest around the country, both staging large-scale protests and getting into fights with individual businesses and employees. I'm telling you, there are several foreign countries that are feeding this kind of stuff into Facebook and other social media, and people are buying it. And they're thinking, hey, we've got to go save our children, or we've got to go, protect our liberties, or whatever. And it's very, very unfortunate. Meanwhile, here in Oregon, there was a gathering of clergy, community, and postal union leaders a couple of days ago. This was on April 28th, 2 days ago. Senators Wyden and Merkley and Representative Earl Blumenauer, who's my congressman, sent messages of appreciation for the workers, for the postal workers, and calls for the removal of Louis DeJoy. Yesterday, that would have been Tuesday of this week, DeJoy released a 10-year plan. He calls it Delivering for America, which would cut post office hours, which would close mail processing plants, which would slow the mail, raise the price, and cut postal jobs. We've already lost 2 postal facilities here in Oregon, and they want to close another one in the town of Bend. There are 82 plants slated for closure. Another one is in Springfield, Oregon. We've already lost the ones in Salem, which is the state capital, and in Pendleton. This is crazy. Further erosion of postal services in the cards for rural post offices, which face hour reductions from 8 to 6 to 4 to even 2 hours a day. And all of this is so, Mark Dimenstein, the president of the United Postal Workers Union, the American Postal Workers Union, he said this is a slap in the face. He said this is a misguided strategy that not only disrupts the lives of postal workers, but will further delay the mail. He went on to say the agency successfully shuttered 141 plants in the first phase. He said, we will fight back facility by facility and community by community to save these processing plants. And Congressman Bill Pascrell, the Democrat from New Jersey, told the Washington Post, quote, the entire Postal Board of Governors and then Mr. DeJoy should be handed their walking papers. Amen. And there's 2 other stories I wanted to share with you very quickly. Rudy Giuliani and Ron Johnson were both notified. Now, this is not new news. This was in the news a year and a half, 2 years ago, that the FBI had told them that the information they were bringing back from Ukraine was disinformation coming from Ukrainian oligarchs and Russian oligarchs specifically to damage Hillary Clinton because they didn't like her. They wanted Donald Trump to be president. Rudy Giuliani and Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin went over there anyway, gathered that information anyway, brought it back to the United States and distributed it all over the news, which, by the way, is a crime if you are working for a foreign government. I think this is one of the things they're looking into with Giuliani is, was he being paid by one of these oligarchs over there? With Ron Johnson, it's probably just, hey, I'm not sure there's a law against stupid. If there is, he should be in jail for a good long time, but I don't think there is a law. And finally, this is a real tragic story, and it's something that we are not hearing anything about in our media. We're not hearing anything. This is the first time I read about this. I'm on the mailing list. This is a military mailing list. It's for the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, SIGAR. And I got this yesterday, No, I got it today, Friday, this morning. And today, SIGAR released its 51st quarterly report to Congress. And I just want to share with you, they go through all the details, 2,038 civilian casualties, 643 deaths, 1,300 injuries. They keep track of what's going on in the country. But here's the part that we're not hearing from or about, and that I think we need to be taking very, very seriously. This does not argue for a prolonged American presence, military presence in Afghanistan, but it does argue for something being done by the world. Just listen to this. The number of Afghans requiring humanitarian assistance, and keep in mind, this is all largely, some of this is climate change, but largely this is the result of, when Mullah Omar, who is running Afghanistan, offered to arrest Osama bin Laden and give him to George W. Bush, George said, no, I want to have a war. It's going to help me get reelected. And so we've been in Afghanistan longer than any other war in the history of the United States. So the number of Afghans requiring humanitarian assistance in 2021 has reached approximately half of Afghanistan's total estimated population. Half of their population. As many as 17 million Afghans, or approximately 42% of the estimated population, will likely face famine during the upcoming year as a result of drought. 16.9 million people in Afghanistan are today facing, quote, crisis and, quote, emergency levels of food insecurity, including 5.5 million people experiencing emergency levels, the second highest levels of starvation in the world. This is Afghanistan that we have been responsible for ever since George W. Bush decided that having a war there would help him get reelected in 2004. And again, back to the SIGAR report, the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. Almost half of Afghanistan's children under 5 years old are projected to face acute malnutrition this year. Half. Now, when George Herbert Walker Bush wanted to have his first little war in Iraq, I realize Iraq and Afghanistan are two different countries, but it is kind of the same philosophy. He thought that having a little 3-day war would help him get reelected in 1992. It didn't work out that way because, as his son pointed out in 1999, he only fought for 3 days. He should have fought longer if he wanted to get reelected. But what came out of that were the sanctions on Iraq, where we sanctioned chlorine for their water supply systems because you can make it into poison gas, As a result of that, 500,000 Iraqi children died. We now have a disaster in Iraq that goes back to George Herbert Walker Bush wanting to have a little war to get reelected, followed by his son, George W. Bush, wanting to have 2 little wars to get reelected. And now you have 500,000 children starving.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
On our watch, in a country that arguably we have, if we don't control, we have tremendous influence over. And welcome back. Let's see here, Jeff in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Jeff, thanks for listening to X-Ray FM, which is, by the way, in a fund drive right now. So, pitch in and help out. Not you, Jeff, necessarily, but anybody else listening here in X-Ray FM. What's up? Or any of our nonprofits that are in fund drive right now.
Yeah, happy Friday, Tom, and shout out to X-Ray. In reference to the president's speech, thank you for your significant contribution to ending Reaganism as we know it. You've done as much as anybody to call out trickle-down economics, and you've been doing it longer than anybody I know. So thank you, Tom. Although although I was impressed with the speech and his first 100 days, I do feel there are a couple areas for improvement. Number one, I agree with Medea Benjamin's critique on some of his foreign policy positions, and her piece is posted on Common Dreams today, which, speaking of fundraisers, I think they're in the last day of their fundraiser. But my question for you, Tom, is regarding the second area for improvement, which would be Medicare expansion. Prior to the speech, we had 17 senators and over 80 House members, including Ro Khanna, call on the president to strengthen Medicare and lower the age of eligibility. Lowering the age to 50 or 55 or even 60, as Biden campaigned on, that'd be an immediate game changer for so many struggling Americans. And adding vision, dental, and hearing would improve life for so many seniors. And then finally, Tom, as you've talked about in the past, it would even open up the job market for younger Americans, as we'd have more people retiring earlier rather than having to wait till they're 65 to get on Medicare. So, Tom, don't you agree we should move this issue to the forefront and keep pushing on the president to include this in the next package, which I think they're calling the American Families Plan?
I absolutely do, Jeff. And I don't know if, I know that they're trying to construct this legislation so that it will pass muster with the Senate parliamentarian as something that can be passed via reconciliation, so that they can use it to amend to the Emergency Act, And whether this would, saying, okay, let's lift the cap, so there's your taxation part, and then let's use that money to expand Medicare and Medicaid, or excuse me, Medicare, expand eligibility for Medicare down to 50 or 55. I don't know if that would pass muster for that, but if it would, it absolutely should be included. And if not, it should be a standalone piece of legislation that we should force Republicans to vote on, because that's the kind of thing that's going to be insanely popular in red states as well as blue states. And we had a caller earlier. Go ahead.
Yeah, and part of it is calling for Medicare to be able to negotiate lower drug prices, which Bernie says will save $450 billion over 10 years. So as far as, the parliamentarian goes, that is a budget consideration. I think that would, make it viable to do. So, yeah, obviously we're still fighting for Medicare for all, for everybody on the national level. And I think an inside-outside strategy, a federal-state strategy, also trying to get that waiver so individual states can do their own Medicare. But in the meantime, I think this, in the near future, we could pull this off. It would be quite significant.
I agree. Great political strategy and great public policy. Jeff, thank you so much for the call, and thanks for listening to X-Ray FM. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Hey, we have a new video up for the supporters of our program over at ThomHartmann.com. I really enjoy doing these separate from what we're doing on the air, because sometimes I can say things that would be impolitic or inappropriate to say on the air. Like the name of the website that I'm talking about in this video, and I lay it out and share it with you on the video. It's ratbleepingthecourts.com, and the bleeping, of course, is a word that you just can't say on the air that starts with F. And this website is just outing these judges that Donald Trump and the Federalist Society have been sending through Mitch McConnell's Senate like a friggin' assembly line, and how unqualified they are, how hateful they are, how aggressively they've worked to screw students, to deny. Well, one of them actually said that women who are on birth control pills, that should be reason to fire people. Right? I mean, it's just insane. You can check it out over at ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back. Anything Goes Friday. Oh, there was a guy on hold here who was saying, oh, Tom's a hypocrite. I was looking forward to taking that call. I actually appreciate it when people disagree with me. It always makes for an interesting conversation, and occasionally I learn things. Marilyn in Sun City, West Arizona. Hey, Marilyn, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. So you spent some time earlier this week talking about taxes and bootstraps, and I'm kind of an anomaly because I attend an evangelical fundamentalist church, and yet I have zero conflict in holding my very conservative biblical values and being a very strong liberal progressive. And I'm highly loved and respected in my church, and yet on the opposite political spectrum. So when the evils of big government and anti-welfare and anti-taxes and bootstraps theory comes up, I'd like your opinion on my answer, which pretty much leaves them speechless. I believe that the reason big government has undertaken to look after the poor, the disabled, the widows, the downtrodden, hungry, sick, whatever, is a very sad commentary on the church's quote-unquote voluntary giving. I believe that if every religious person, specifically the Christian right, did what they preach their Bible says and actually voluntarily gave their 10%, if they all did it, there would be more than enough money for all of these things and more. So really, the government undertaking this burden is only because you, my fellow church members, have failed in practicing what you preach and holding up your own biblical principles, because somebody's got to do it. So we don't need to hate big government. We need to be thankful that the government has stepped up to the plate because the Christian church did not.
Wow. Well, there's a lot of truth to that, Marilyn. I would add a couple of data points to it and let you ponder, how to whether or not to integrate this into your argument. Number one, the Mormon communities, particularly in Idaho, Utah, and northern Arizona, are rigorous about enforcing a 10% tithe. And they're also really good at caring for the poor among them. So there's your example of a Christian community taking all that seriously. That's the kind of upside of it, and of kind of religion basically doing it. The downside is that when you go to a Mormon tabernacle, to a Mormon church to get your food aid, or when you reach out to the Mormons to get help, you get heavily evangelized. And whereas when you go to get food stamps or when you go to get help from the government, nobody is standing there telling you which political party to vote for, or how to think, or how to believe, or how to behave. And that's why I'm with James Madison on this. The first veto of his presidency, which I think would have been in 1809, was a bill that was passed by Congress they wanted to pay for, up until that point, there had been this poorhouse that was established even before the United States. It was established under the Articles of Confederation in Washington, D.C. And George Washington, signed legislation to pay for it, and it provided health care, housing, and food and clothing to the poor people of Washington, D.C., specifically just the district. And in 1809, as I recall, I might be a year off, it might have been 1810, Congress passed a law saying, instead of us, Congress, giving this money to this poorhouse and supporting it, let's give the money to the local Presbyterian church. I'm pretty sure it was the Presbyterian church because that was Madison's church. Let's give this money to that church instead, and the church can run the program. And Madison vetoed that, saying that it would establish a precedent of giving to religious organizations what should be a civic function. So I don't know if I've changed your thinking at all, Marilyn. I think your argument is a compelling one, and certainly calls out the hypocrisy in a lot of these churches that are far more interested in building fancy buildings and getting $30 million jets for their preachers than feeding the poor. But what do you think about all that?
I think you're absolutely right. I just need to call them out on their own level playing field. And so, do you understand what I mean?
I absolutely do. I absolutely do. And this is where, just reciting Matthew 25 to these folks. It's shocking to me how many people who call themselves Christians who have never seriously read just two little pieces. Matthew, 5, 6, 7, the Sermon on the Mount, and Matthew 25, I think it starts with the 31st verse, which is the only place in the Bible where the disciples come to Jesus and say, how do we get to heaven to hang out with you? And he said, well, you know, if you gave me water when I was thirsty, you can hang out with me. And they're all freaked out. They're like, we never saw you thirsty. And then he says, as you did to the least among the, you know, and food and healthcare and all that kind of stuff.
And my point to them is mostly that I understand their point on volunteer giving, and that's all fine, but you're not doing it. If you were doing it and you really believed in it, we wouldn't be in this situation. But because you have chosen not to do it, the government has.
Yeah, I think it's a marvelous argument, you know, and I didn't mean to argue nuance with you, Marilyn. I just wanted to add a little more data that you may or may not find useful. But thank you very much for the call. It's great to hear from you. And also, my experience has been that the Seventh-day Adventist community is about as tight as the Mormon community is as well. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And the Seventh-day Adventists are vegetarians. We'll be back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday right after this.
We're reading today from Warrior Is by Harley and Robin Zephyr. It's the story of their great-grandfather who, in real life, killed Custer at Little Bighorn. And in fact, there's a map of the war, as it were, the battle. And they say that he is now the spirit keeper of Custer, which is remarkable. And there's a page-and-a-half introduction to the book, and then it becomes, a historically accurate novel, basically. This story is the traditional and cultural account of the life of Nikogju Lakota warrior Mato Nyanpi, saved by bear, which his name in English, also later known as Scarleg. Warrior is based upon a true story. What you are about to read has been told to us through our family, passed down as oral history from generation to generation. Every family has its own story. This is ours. It's up to you to visualize and experience the events described herein in order to determine what you believe or what you choose to accept from what you learn from these pages. You've likely never read a story quite like this before. In Warrior Is, the reader is able to visualize and experience the events and circumstances of Mato Nyanpi's life. Many times the story is told in the present tense, such as if you were walking with Saved by Bear and his people as the events unfold. This was our original manner of storytelling. Other times the story is narrated in the past tense to account for a past perspective. Those of us who may not be entirely fluent in particular words or specific language, as much as we may be fluent in spirit and honest communication, the life messages many times can be more meaningful than just the written or spoken words. Warrior Is follows the timeline from the time of creation, moving through Saved by Bear's birth in 1849, and going up to July 1876, 2 weeks after the Grass Battle. Please exercise your free will and follow your conscience when reading this story. The spiritual side is called upon you to open your spirit so that you may read this tale and learn about these events through your own spirit. And, continues sort of like in that line, but here, right to the book. Prologue. He smelled the yellow of the sun. His spirit was alive and energetic. He felt the energy in his chest and all along the blood running through his veins. He looked to his left to see his great friend by his side. The strong scent of sage caressed his nostrils and reminded him of home. The movement over the high-running hilly ridge to the south caught his eye. He and Swift Bear sensed and felt the pathway opening up. So much had occurred so quickly, so suddenly, so dramatically. Their call to duty, his call to duty, filled his mind, his heart, his spirit. Today, it was meant to happen. It was presented to the people from the Creator. The plan was made. The warriors summoned. The preparation was done. It all led to this place, this portal in time. The sparse clouds to the west resembled mare's tails, and for a brief moment he remembered his white stone friend in the White Mountains. He remembered his spiritual commitment to protect his people, Grandmother Earth, and the sacred Hisapa. And time stood still for a moment, a small moment in time, through all of the ancient and original history of all the moments of time. And as the group of the horse-mounted soldiers rode briskly over the far ridge, the Creator shined that warm, nurturing light upon these warriors. Such as Creator had been doing since the beginning of time, since the beginning of Grandmother Earth and Grandfather Sky, and at the beginning of all things. All the moments of time forever had arrived here, now. It had come to this. Creator's strong will and great invisible hand had placed them here. It was the Creator all along. It always was. It always would be. For one to know what led the young Lakota warriors to be here at this fateful site near the Greasy Grass River on this warm, sun-drenched day, one must go back in time, way back to the beginning, when it was only the Creator, and the Creator of all things decided to create a new world. Her name would be Unsimaka, Grandmother Earth, and she would be created to hold and sustain life. All kinds of beings, all kinds of people would be given and placed upon and within her to show her love of life. And this is how it all began. Chapter 1, Origin. The human beings evolved from the spirit. Before arriving in Wind Cave, we were star people. Many of us came from a place called the Pleiades, the Seven Sisters, an ancient star grouping and constellation that contains worlds comprised of the gift of life-giving water. Water is life. Mini Wikoni. The Pleiadian influence is an absolute, but those of us who claim to be relatives of the Pleiadians share a common bond with other indigenous people, regardless of where we are geographically on the earth. We will always remain Pleiadian star people. Spiritually, we have become human beings of different races and ethnicities, but the origin of our spirit is the water. And for us, and as to who we are, as the tribal people in a family way, our name is Minkoju, its evidence. It means life's subsistence through the gathering and planting by the waters and or river. The Minikochu spend their lives living by the waters. This is something that many of our own people do not know or understand, but this is our history, not only of our physical existence, but also the history of our spiritual existence on Unsimaka. The book is Warrior Is by Robin and Harley Zephyr. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. It is 34 minutes past the hour on the Thom Hartmann Program. Fair and only slightly unbalanced Norma in Montgomery, Alabama. Hey, Norma, what's on your mind today?
Well, I had intended to call and talk about the fact that everybody who scans and bags their groceries or whatever their purchases is an unpaid employee of that corporation. But after listening to a guy talk about expanded Medicare, I had called Senator Sanders suggesting that we have Medicare for children 18 and under so that they are all covered, and that we also marry that Medicare to education, marry health care for children to education, so that we could have a clinic at each and every school across the country with a dental hygienist, an optometrist, and an asthma allergist specialist. That way, parents don't have to take off of work to go get their kid and take them to the doctor. This would increase the health care access to every child in the United States. It would provide access for every child in the United States. And if it's covered by Medicare, the people who operate these clinics might have a choice between being a private clinic or working for the federal government and having a job that gave them benefits. I think it would have to be choice. But this would provide knowledge and care, because most men die from some form of heart disease, and heart disease is usually attributed to infections in the heart. And if you have infected gums, that infection gets into your bloodstream and can damage your heart. And so we could provide this health care for young people and teach them why it's so important, so that they can always have health care and they can take care of themselves better and cut down on early death.
I love it. I absolutely love it. I think it's a great idea. It could be combined with lowering the Medicare age to 50, raise the bottom, from 0 to 18. Get clinics in our schools. I think it's absolutely brilliant. Norma, thank you. That's a really good one. I appreciate the call. Bill in Woodwright, Illinois. Hey, Bill, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Quite a few years ago, you went to an archaeological dig in Peru, and I've always wondered what became of that.
I did. I wrote a book about it, actually. Well, I mean, and not the whole book. It's the last chapter of the book. The book is called Threshold, The Crisis of Western Civilization. I think they came up with a new title for it a while when it came out in paperback, something like Threshold, Progressive Plan for America or something. And the city that I visited was called Caral, C-A-R-A-L. You can Google it. And the woman who was running the dig, her name was Dr. Ruth Shady. And this was probably 15 years ago. We did our show, in fact, live from Lima, Peru. We essentially rented a radio station there, and we were live. I didn't realize that they were going to simulcast it in Lima, So for 3 hours a day for a week, I was on the air in Lima, Peru, as well as everywhere else. And then every afternoon we went out to the dig, and this was the first mother city. Now, mother city is where hunting, gathering people settled down and became city dwellers. And this was the first mother city that had ever been found that didn't have subsequent cities built on top of it. And so it was pristine. And the reason why is because there had been a local climate change event that happened around 5,000 years ago when Caral was built, after it had been around for 1,000 years or so, that moved. There was all these sand dunes just down the road, just a quarter mile away, and it literally moved these sand dunes, this quarter mile, and completely covered this city. It was discovered by pilots flying over, taking aerial photos and seeing, hey, it looks like there's a pyramid down there. Hey, it looks like there's a giant circle down there. And so they went down and started the excavation. And the amazing thing, and I wrote about this in my book Threshold, is that Dr. Shady, and I walked up to these places. I was inside them, around them. They have done substantial excavations there. They were unable to find any weaponry whatsoever. Now, this city was about 20 miles from the ocean. There was another community that lived on the ocean. At that time, sardines were the primary food that was gathered there. This community grew cotton and other types of fibers, and they made nets, and they traded those nets with the sardine fishermen over on the coast. They obviously had an active trade. In fact, one of the pyramids that they were uncovering, they had these huge piles of discarded netting between layers of rock. It was fascinating to look at. And then there was this giant amphitheater, this round amphitheater, where you could stand in the middle of it. I did. You stand in the middle of it. It's like a bullfighting ring, kind of thing. It's like kind of that shape in size, or maybe a rodeo kind of thing. And you could stand in the middle and speak in a normal tone of voice and hear your voice echoed from all around you. It was the most acoustically perfect place I've ever experienced in my life. And when they began to excavate under the stands, the bleachers as it were, what they found were dozens, maybe hundreds of panpipes. Those little, flute kind of pipes that they had 5,000 years ago. And they concluded that this was not for sport or for violence or anything like that. There were no weapons anywhere. They found dolls. They found children's toys. They literally didn't find any weaponry. But they found all these panpipes. And the conclusion they came to was that this is where people celebrated, whether it was religious or whether it was just, hey, let's get together and hang out. And maybe, with the sardine people. But her conclusion was quite emphatic that the first mother city did not know violence, which I thought was just astonishing, Bill.
Yeah, really. So what do you think of Göbekli Tepe?
I'm sorry?
In Turkey. What do you think of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey?
Oh,
which is like 12,000 years old.
Yeah, I'm not sufficiently familiar with it to speak intelligently about it, and I've never been there. So the only two mother cities that I've been to where I was actually down deep into the origin, into the mother city, part of the mother city, are Corral and Jerusalem. And Jerusalem, of course, has had city after city after city built on top of it over the years. So it's hard to know the actual history of it early starting on, but so anyhow, Bill, I've got to move along, but thank you. Thanks for asking the question. And if you want to read the whole chapter on it, it's in my book, Threshold. I'm not trying to sell the book. You can find used copies, and good chunks of it actually are available on the internet. You can just track it down and read it. Denise in Chicago. Hey, Denise, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Well, first I want to say that when I hear people go after you, I get mad. I want to punch them in the nose.
Oh, now.
Well, I mean that in
sometimes we learn from our critics, Denise. Sometimes they're just fools, but sometimes we learn from them.
I always listen to how you're so good at answering them too, so I do learn. Okay, so I had a very dear friend of mine in Switzerland watch President Biden's speech, and because she's a fan of and lived here and all that kind of stuff, and she is adamant about a statement he made about U.S. hiding money in Switzerland. And she told me that that's not true, that, and I'm not going to get into the minutia, but basically she's saying it's not legal. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's the point, I think. So do you know anything that, just topical laws on that?
Only what I've read in the press, Denise. I'm no expert on this, but I did actually, when I lived in Germany in the 80s, I tried to open a Swiss bank account and discovered that you have to pay them to take your money. Yeah. They don't pay you. That's exactly what you said. Yeah, and the Swiss used to have these insane privacy laws that, they were impenetrable. It was almost impossible to find out who was putting money in Swiss accounts. And so, in the 60s and 70s and 80s and in all the old mystery novels that you'll read and James Bond movies and things, and the old Robert Ludlum, novels, you'll find the bad guys are stashing their money in Switzerland because Switzerland would conceal that, would hide that. Idi Amin, when I was in Uganda in the late 70s, in 79 and 1980, Idi Amin had stashed a whole pile of his money in Switzerland, or at least that was the local lore. And of course, Saudi Arabia took him in because he declared that Uganda was all Muslim, and then he lived in a giant palace with his 32 wives for the rest of his life in Saudi Arabia as a patron of the king. But my understanding is that in the 90s or in the early 2000s, as a result of pressure throughout and across the European Union, and I'm not sure if Switzerland is part of the EU. I think they're not. They're certainly not part of the common currency.
No, they're not. I know
that. Go ahead.
No, I just said the currency for sure. I know that. I don't think they're in the EU. But
yeah,
go ahead,
I'm not sure about the EU. I do know they're not part of the common currency. But they changed their laws, and they changed their. They're not transparent like everybody would like, but they do not any longer brook the kind of secrecy and the kind of bad actors that they used to. And I'm guessing Joe Biden, being in his 70s, is just remembering the good old days, because now those jobs are being done by the, it's happening in the Caymans and in Panama and the Isle of Wight. Say that again? Hang on.
You mentioned
Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video.
Oh, Liechtenstein, yeah. I don't know about Liechtenstein, but I know that the Swiss have cleaned up their act a lot. Denise, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. It's 45 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Let's see here. Brian in push the right button there. Brian in Anaheim, California. Hey, Brian, what's on your mind? Brian, you are on the air. No Brian. Okay, let's try Marianne in your... Oh, Marianne, you're listening to a commercial station. You're on a break. Let me put you on hold. I'll come back to you. James in Spokane, Washington, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, James, what's on your mind today?
Das been down, yeah, y'all. I just wanted to say, Tom, a couple of ideas to take just a second to save us, to save our democracy and save humanity. We would just make an investment in the children. You know, it'd be so cheap if the billionaires would get off of a few bucks, take care of the food, shelter, clothing, just the basic necessities of our children. We'd save ourselves in a generation, wouldn't we? And along that line, end the war on drugs. If you want to save ourselves, for God's sake, we're still selling legal cigarettes, killing people with tobacco. Nobody's going to jail for that. All the lies they tell about it. Nobody's going to jail for that.
Well, unless you sell those cigarettes one at a time, in which case you will get choked to death.
If you're black. True. That's true. Yeah, general speaking,
Eric Garner.
You know what I mean?
Let us not forget. But yeah, I totally get your point. And we are investing nothing close to what we should be investing in public education. And we are insanely pursuing the hyper-militarization of our police. And now we've got John Ehrlichman on the record. I don't know if you've seen this. This was a few years ago. A reporter tracked down John Ehrlichman. He was, Richard Nixon's right-hand man, and started asking him about the war on drugs. And Ehrlichman said, "You want to know what this was really about?" He said, our principal enemies were the anti-war hippies and the blacks. And you couldn't make it illegal to be anti-war or African-American. So what we did was we heavily criminalized marijuana, which the hippies liked, and heroin, which was a problem in the black community. We heavily criminalized these drugs so that we could then go in and break up their communities, disrupt their cultures. As I recall, that's a quote, or maybe it was disrupt their communities, and put their leaders in jail, which is exactly what they did, by the way. And he said, and then he ends this quote, John Ehrlichman. He says, did we know that this was a lie, that these drugs, this war on drugs was only going to produce this negative outcome, that it wasn't going to help society? He said, did we know this was a lie? Yes, of course we knew it was a lie. That was Richard Nixon's war on drugs. And of course, Reagan came in and doubled down on it.
It was all political. All political.
It was all
political. That's been done at the taxpayers' expense. And the prisons are hellholes for anybody.
Yep.
You know.
Yes, and they shouldn't be. They shouldn't be. I mean, no. if our goal is to rehabilitate people, our sentences are too long and our prisons are too brutal. We need to be looking at how Europe does this. Norway is a great example, most easily seen in Michael Moore's movie Where to Invade Next. It is so worth watching just for that segment on the Norwegian prisons and the Norwegian policing. It's just mind-boggling. And so much that we could do. Yeah, thank you, James. You too. So much we could do. So many ways that we could be saving lives and improving the quality of life in the United States. And instead, because some private prison guy wants to make a buck, or some politician thinks demagoguing drugs is going to get him reelected, we get this kind of BS that we've had to put up with now for 50, 60 years. And thank God, state after state is saying enough already. We're going to at least decriminalize pot. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Hey, we have a new video over at ThomHartmann.com. It's about this movement that has, it's being characterized in the media as being just, fringe wackadoodles, crazy people on YouTube, stuff like that, who are talking about how Democrats are torturing children to get adrenochrome out of them, and Hillary Clinton is eating babies, and the ship in the Suez Canal, and how, and the really interesting one now, how if you get the vaccine for COVID, that it will change your race. Yes, something that will make white people absolutely hysterical. The problem is, this isn't just the Flat Earth Society. These aren't the people that we used to laugh at. This isn't just a few crazies on the edge. They just had a convention in Oklahoma. A serious convention where they were calling for Democrats to be put in front of a firing squad and shot. You need to check this out. It's over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. My shoulder getting a little problematic. I hope that's not hitting my microphone. Let me move that just a little bit. There we go. Okay, welcome back. Let's pick up your phone calls. Maine in Chicago. Hey, Maine, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, how you doing, Tom? My thing is about the police and how what they've been doing for over 400 years and what is called overseering. They've been overseering for the past 400 years when it comes to black people. When to them, when a black person gets out of line, then they're there to put them back in their place, even if that means killing or murdering a black person. And what's that but to set an example for others? This means, excuse me, because they are to protect the capitalists and the oligarchs and Wall Street and the Loop, like here in Chicago and downtown L.A. and Houston. They have the mindset of the overseer of the slavery days. And so they police the same way. They shoot first and ask questions later. They're quick to tie somebody on the whipping post to be whipped to death or near death, and they don't care if it's a man, woman, or child.
That's essentially, you're describing our criminal justice system, Maine, and you're right. It came out of the slave patrols. It came out of the overseers. The overseers were the guys who sat on horseback with a shotgun, making sure that everybody was picking cotton the way they were supposed to, et cetera. And this is why fundamental police reform, not just tweaking around the edges, but actually re-envisioning who is policing, why we're policing, how we're policing, what policing even means, is absolutely essential for the future of this country and for the quality of life of this country. Maine, you put your thumb right on it. Thank you so much. Don in Omaha, Nebraska. Hey, Don, what's up?
Tom, I got a question regarding those grand juries in Atlanta. What's the status on that?
I don't know. You're talking about the ones who are looking into Donald Trump trying to manipulate the election?
Exactly.
Yeah, grand juries operate in secret, so typically you don't know what's going on with the grand jury until they actually issue an indictment. Occasionally, a subpoena will leak out, but even those are supposed to be in secret. Are
they still working on it, Tom?
Oh, yes, they absolutely are. And the one news story I've seen about this, Don, is that some of the old Trump administration folks are refusing to cooperate with the grand jury in Atlanta, and which that in and of itself may become problematic. But there are jurisdictional problems. You would have to extradite those folks from wherever they happen to be. They're not in Georgia. Which makes it all the more difficult. But that's all I know about it, Don. If I learn anything, I promise I will come back and fill you in. Thank you. Larry in Los Angeles. Hey, Larry, what's up?
Last week we talked about the tendency of Republicans to give us a recession every time they get a first term, and it's 100%. And one of your callers talked about it appeared that Republicans were harvesting the wealth of America whenever they give these recessions by giving big tax cuts to the rich and then bailing them out of the recession. Basically, what they're doing is just expanding the difference between the rich and the poor, the wealth gap.
Yeah, and I think the biggest part of it, Larry, is that the recession is a massive buying opportunity for very wealthy people to acquire assets that then increase in value very rapidly as the recession ends, whether it's stocks or real estate or whatever.
In recent recessions, what the government does is it actually makes these wealthy investors whole again, and which is what I call reparations for the rich. They repair the damage that they did to the economy by making these wealthy investors whole again. And so you had a guy, Dr. Frank, talking about the willful ignorance of Republicans and why they keep supporting Republicans who do them harm, which is kind of hit on what I was talking about when I also said that the Republicans, when they're doing this stuff, they're just ignorant. They refuse to learn that the policies that they put in place cause these recessions, and they get away with doing this by always jumping to culture wars. And what I am proposing is Democrats and progressives should make the Republicans own their history. 10 recessions out of the last 11 recessions in the last 68 years, 18 recessions in the last 120 years. Make them own it. Bring it up every time they get on TV and radio.
I'm with you, Larry. I'm with you. Larry, I got to run, but thank you for the call, and thanks for staying on it. It's a great topic. Special thanks to Louise Hartman, Sean Taylor, Nate Atwell, Jamie Holly, Joyce the Hammer Nance, Nigel Peacock, Sue Nethercutt, Patrick Hoyt, Geraldine Halbert, Ron Hartenbaum, Chase Spross, Nicholas Miller, Pat Sweeney, Jabbermocky, and Jay LeBlanc. Thank you all for helping make this program work. Thank you for being with us and for spreading the good word and for supporting our program and supporting however you're hearing or seeing this program. Please do that. Let them know that you're listening or paying attention. Get out there, get active, tag You're It. Have a wonderful weekend. We'll see you on Monday.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code TOM. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!